Ryan Holmes, 2019 Best Visual Artist for City Pulse's Top of the Town. I am a local Ghostbuster, leader of the Lansing Ghostbusters, which is a nonprofit through the Great Lakes Ghostbuster Coalition. I am a teacher. I teach art for Mid-Michigan Leadership Academy, and I teach my own personal art classes. And I'm a placemaker. I do a lot of different things around the city and community to try to build for the community, kids, adults, and everybody involved. So, placemaking brings culture, different types of culture, and as a city that's continuously trying to grow and be economically fruitful and is constantly inviting all types of groups of people in, having that ability to be vibrant with enrichment from like art and infusion, even from music and food and things like that, all that just turns a normal community into something that is just going to continuously grow. People are going to come to it, add to it, and it's going to be reinventing itself to be transformative. For me, in my personal experience, a lot of my art started at the tin can, and in 8 years, what I've been able to do by just bringing art on a weekly basis, every Friday I go in and I create a new chalk mural, was I was allowed them to be part of the experience of art and culture. Because art is one thing if you're sitting at home doing it for yourself, or you're creating something and putting it out in the world, but to be able to put something up and have it start a conversation. Those conversations that were happening at the tin can started changing that culture. People, instead of just coming out for a drink, were coming out to just see art and being aware that new art was changing and keeping up with it. And it changed that culture. It changed the type of people who wanted to come to that. It brought different people from the community into that place. So it's fun to see on a smaller scale how that became something that was important, and it showed that art is important to people. They notice when I take a break. They notice when I was gone, you know. And at first, I had people. My things got trashed. I couldn't keep something up for a couple days, but now I can leave for 2 weeks to go do art in another community, come back, and the last thing I drew is unscathed. And it's been protected by respect and the fact that people have. That's a part of them now. When they have ownership over it. And I try to always draw something that people will get ownership over. It means something to you. It means something to your childhood, or it means something to the climate of whatever's going on. Usually not political. I'd probably say never political. I steer away from sports too, just because we can be divisive in those ways too. But yeah, it changes things. It has so much, even on a smaller scale. Definitely.
I've been a part of the Lansing community my entire life. There are needs throughout this area that are met by placemaking. When we get the public art, we get people moving around the city, we have lots of things to see and do around here, we get more visitors to the area, and we have a great community to live in.
The arts are the cornerstone of society. They're the reason, in my opinion, we interact with one another as humans. And creative placemaking helps us better as municipalities to better understand the value of the arts and culture. And creative placemaking offers an opportunity for everyone to come to the table in the interest of arts and culture in our communities.
Super important to me as the father of a 12-year-old,
right,
that we've got something for him to continue to stay in this region and find those arts.
I think the Arts Council at its best brings together the creative sector and the entire community at large. And the Creative Placemaking event offers an opportunity for all of us to be at the table and have conversations about what makes our communities vibrant.
Totally agree. As the president and board of a performing arts organization, we get very insular at times. We know about theater, but we don't talk to the dance companies. We don't talk to the visual artists that are in this community. And we always inspire each other. We always get new ideas, find ways that we can build off of each other's successes.
And it's good to see you.
Great to see you.
Good morning. It's good to see everyone here. It is my privilege to welcome you to the Arts Council of Greater Lansing's 5th Annual Creative Placemaking Summit, presented by our visionary title sponsor, the Greater Lansing Regional Prosperity Initiative. We're fortunate to have so many supportive sponsors for this event, as we could not present this summit without them. We're pleased to acknowledge our accelerator sponsor, LAFQ, our impact sponsor, CATA, and our driving force sponsors, Lansing Public Media, Lansing Board of Water and Light, City of Lansing Parking Services, Michigan Premier Events, and Render Studios, who also created the video that you will be seeing. Please join me in giving a big round of applause for all of our generous sponsors this year. Thank you. So here we are, celebrating 5 years of creative placemaking in our Greater Lansing region. We have accomplished so much in the last 5 years, and today we will reflect on those accomplishments and look toward the future of placemaking in our region. As you saw when you entered the concourse this morning, this event is all about arts and culture and the ways in which it can bring us together, grow our communities, and enhance our region by telling its stories through art and creativity. Our mission at the Arts Council is to support, strengthen, and promote arts, culture, and creativity in the Capital Region, and we believe that the creative placemaking is the perfect vehicle. So enjoy the day to the fullest, talk to new people and old friends, share ideas, collaborate, and make plans for exciting projects. That's what this day is all about. Before we get started, it's my pleasure to invite our City of Lansing Mayor, Andy Shore, to the podium. Please welcome Mayor Shore.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, it's still early. Good morning, everyone. There it is. Welcome to Lansing. Welcome to the Lansing Center. I love this event every year. So thank you to the Arts Council for doing a lot of the heavy lifting, all the heavy lifting. We have a lot of my staff here, so if you have anything you want to say to the city, of how great we are or whatever we could do to be better, feel free to grab them. Sorry, staff, but you're all going to get grabbed. First, I know your agenda, if you look in your book, says it's supposed to be Deputy Mayor Samantha Harkins this morning. She had a last-minute emergency, so you're stuck with me, so my apologies. I know most of you want to see Samantha instead, but we'll make sure she knows that she's missed. But arts and culture is tremendously important to the city of Lansing. It's important all around the country. It's actually a session every year at the U.S. Conference of Mayors. We talk about art and culture. The mayor of Reno is huge with Burning Man, and they talk about all the art they do there. And they actually had several mayors go to Burning Man. And I came home, I told my wife, I said, I'm going to go to Burning Man. She looked at me and said, you're not going to Burning Man. And she's right. But it is tremendously important. We are doing a ton in the city of Lansing with arts and culture. We have been putting money into this. Before I came, it was about $100,000. We upped it to $150,000. This year, we upped the budget to $165,000 of our dollars that we're putting into art. It's important, right? It is tremendously important. I'm glad you're applauding. It's tremendously important. That grows our city. Just like every building that we revitalize, every road we fix, and we are fixing some, every sidewalk, but putting art up with color, its vibrancy, and it's exciting. We've done a lot of stuff with these dollars. This year, drive around the city. No matter where you are, downtown, south side, north side, east side, what are you seeing? Murals, right? I saw Jose is here. There it is. That is incredible. We love it. That is excitement. There was this Love Lansing mural put up over by the stadium even before Below the Stacks, and now we've got Below the Stacks and murals everywhere. This is excitement. It's vibrancy. It's art. And we put dollars into that on purpose because that grows our city and shows excitement. We've seen a lot of other things, Rotary Park, the Community Foundation led a great effort. We work with them. Now we've got a beach and we've got tables and chairs, and we are starting to reactivate the riverfront. And that is tremendously important. We're seeing the great piece on our parking deck right downtown with all the colors and vibrancy. That's going to continue. You're going to see a lot more of that because it helps to boost our city. Last year, I established the Mayor's Art and Culture Commission. Which is a huge piece to our placemaking strategy and to how we have a vision and strategy for art moving forward, whether it's education, whether it's intergovernmental relations, whether it's public art. Many of you here are on that commission, and I appreciate it, whether you're on the commission or some of the committees. They're doing tremendously important work. I just got the the annual report from the chair of that commission, who, as many of you know, is my wife. But she sent me the official email, "Dear Mayor Shore." My staff always thinks that's hilarious, but you know, it's still official. But we're going to put that out publicly. They're doing so much work, and I think people don't even know how much work they're doing. Because you know, art and culture is just that important for the city of Lansing, and I'm proud that everything we've done. So I'm gonna get off the stage and shut up because otherwise they bring out the big hook. But I want you to know two things. One, we have this My Kind of People campaign. You are my kind of people. You are the people that are making this happen here in Lansing, so I appreciate it. And two, we keep saying it, and now people are starting to get it. Lansing's time is now. Lansing's time is now, and we are doing a lot of work, but we can't do it alone. I have to thank you all for the work that you are doing in Lansing. Thank you, My Kind of People, for boosting art and boosting culture and making sure that this is a priority here in Lansing. Have a great day.
Thank you, Mayor. And now it is my extreme pleasure to introduce our Arts Council Interim Executive Director, Megan Martin, and she is going to kickstart this day, get some energy going, so please welcome Megan to the podium.
Darn, it feels good to be up here. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming to the Creative Placemaking Summit. This is our 5th year, and I'm so proud to be up here and inviting you all to our table. As Patty said, I'm Megan Martin. I'm the Interim Executive Director at the Arts Council of Greater Lansing, and it is something that I am very proud of, and arts has been a part of my life since I was very young. And so to be up here talking to you about the importance of creative placemaking and arts and culture, when my previous teachers, my leaders, the people that brought art to my life from a very young age, it's very inspiring for me to be up here and surrounded by artists and arts and cultural organizations and community leaders that feel the same way that I do about arts and culture and how it can be the driving force in this region and beyond. So with that being said, I want to thank my board president, Patty Barnes, and Mayor Shore for giving such a warm welcome to everybody. And their commitment to arts and culture is also unmatched. They are, as you heard the mayor speak, very ingrained in the arts and why it's important. I want to, again, thank our driving force sponsors, Michigan Premier Events, if you might see Ashley Willis and her team around, and the Lansing Public Media Center. They helped me so much. I literally wouldn't be up here if they weren't such a great support for me. I want to thank the Lansing Center for their support every year. They've been a great partner for us in making sure that this is a dynamic event that is unique and entertaining and runs smoothly, and that we have some really good grub and coffee right at the start of the day. So I want to thank them always, and also to Chase Creative for I come up with these crazy creative ideas. You know, we're the Arts Council, and they always help me pull them off. So I want to thank them as well. Finally, I want to thank our driving force sponsor, Render Studios, for being a consistent supporter of not only the Arts Council, but arts and culture in general. They're our neighbors in Old Town, and they also they document how arts and culture has flourished in our region and the efforts that we're doing. And you captivate us with your work every year at the summit. So thank you so much. So I'd like to give a warm round of applause for those sponsors. 5 years ago, I actually started, not in this position, but with the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission that has been a great support of ours, and working with GLRPI. But I was on the steering committee for this event, and I was so enamored with the foresight that the Arts Council had to bring not just our usual suspects to the table, but they really wanted to bring a cross-sector of our community together. And that's where you come in, and that's where our steering committee has come in every year. They understand the importance and the underestimated value that arts and culture has to flourish in our community and be an economic driver. So I want to thank that group of people that have dedicated time, energy, and their passion to helping me build this event and bring everybody to the table to talk about it. So if my steering committee could please, if you're in the audience, rise, and I'd love to give you an applause. Thank you. And I'd also like to say that this takes a village, as they say, and we are a very small but mighty staff at the Arts Council. We are a force to be reckoned with ourselves. I'd love to thank our team at the Arts Council. They're talented, they're creative, and they make this a success. Specifically, Dawn Gorman, my communications and events manager, I'd love to give her, and my graphic designer and photographer, Ryan Logan, and not present, our membership and program manager, Taylor Haslett, who's in Barcelona on our honeymoon, but she's well appreciated and she was great support up until this point. I'd really like to congratulate them on a job well done. So as you go about your day, I hope that you'll introduce yourselves together to each other. One of the beauties of this event is that we are bringing people from all different sectors and crossing over imaginary barriers through our different sectors. But I'd like you to introduce yourself to each other and ask yourself, how will you keep this forward momentum that we've been on for the past 5 years? How will you keep it going? This has been a great event where ideas happen, so I'd really like to see you switch seats throughout the day and network in the different areas that we have, engage with the artwork that we have, and learn from one another and inspire one another. Over the past 5 years, we've really been able to see many different projects develop out of this event, several of which I see some of the inspirational people in here. Jose, he was here as a big force last year, and I mean, I'm not going to say like vis-a-vis, you see a mural festival the next year, but inspiring ideas happen here. So we want to see what next big things are going to happen. So as you go throughout the day, there are definitely installments and different things for you to see. If you do need to take a break to have those inspiring conversations, there's a TV viewing area in the pub area that, you'll still be able to see all of our speakers, but you can still have that networking opportunity and have less disruption for our speakers. And as I said, we do want to keep this forward momentum going, and I want you to know that the Arts Council is here to support you. We have several grant programs and technical assistance opportunities to help you get these projects off the ground, and our staff is really dedicated to seeing where we can help you connect dots with artists, arts and cultural organizations, and keep the momentum going, as the name of this event suggests. So on behalf of the Arts Council of Greater Lansing, I want to welcome you again to the Creative Placemaking Summit. We are indebted to our sponsors for helping make this a reality. Most notably, the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs is our state-level arts organization, our state-level arts council, excuse me. And we have great support from them. They're here in Lansing, and they're always dedicated to the work that we do. We also receive funding from the National Endowment for the Arts that's on our national level, advocating for more arts and culture and access to arts and culture for people around the nation. And I want to again thank our visionary title sponsor that's been here since the beginning, the Greater Lansing Regional Prosperity Initiative. So I'd like to give them all a round of applause real quickly. And as is tradition, Renders Studios has been, as I said, an amazing team for us to work with, and they have kicked us off every year with an amazing video that I would like to present now and get you inspired, get you excited, and ask yourself how you're going to keep this forward momentum going that we've had for the past 5 years. How are you going to be a part of this, and how are we going to make this happen? Thank you.
Every year, Lansing gets better. There's more life, more energy, and more change.
So a lot of times placemaking projects really focus on what they do for improving the economy or attracting talent, and those are really important, but you also can't underestimate the value that placemaking has just on community connection.
It says a lot about a community who's willing to either reclaim space, repurpose space for the greater good of the whole community. Art for me is just like it's done best in collaboration with what's already there and what can be.
Infrastructure is important to placemaking. We have to be accessible to all people, and we want to be diverse. We want to be able to serve all interests of all people.
It shows a real commitment to the idea that art means something to people and that it can inspire them. You will see people around the sculpture and they'll be talking about it. What is it all about? And it has movement to it, so little kids are fascinated by it. It's a wonderful thing.
Parks have a historical mission to protect cultures, and so part of that shows like the relationship between like people and the environment. When we are creating place, we're like contributing our ideas to an area and hopefully ways that make our quality of life better, but also future generations' quality of life.
Lansing's in a little bit of a renaissance right now. I came back after undergrad and I was thrilled at the opportunities that I was able to engage in here, and I was more excited to be able to engage in a community that already exists.
Future generations of Lansing are going to reap the benefits of all this creative energy and hopefully continue the momentum. The narrative is shifting from success looks like me leaving Lansing when I'm of age to like I can't wait to contribute to all the great things that are happening here.
Good morning. I am Ann Brown. I am the Ingham County rep from the office of Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin. So we're pleased to be here this morning to, one, celebrate this, and two, to acknowledge the fact that this is the 5th summit. But we also brought a little gift, and I'd like for Patty and Megan to step forward. The office of Congresswoman Slotkin is giving a certificate of special congressional recognition to the Arts Council of Greater Lansing for their contribution to improving the lives of the residents. Thank you. Just want to say that Congresswoman Slotkin certainly is a supporter of the arts. She held a arts competition for all of the high schools in the Michigan's 8th District last year, and we'll be doing that again this year. The winner of that contest, actually, the art is displayed not only in our office, but it's also displayed in DC, so it gets visibility every day. I want to say also that creative placemaking, as the council or Congresswoman has said to us, is really a game changer in the sense that it is a model for public-private partnerships that she is certainly a supporter of. So thank you.
Now we'd like to introduce a short video from President Samuel Stanley from Michigan State University. He was invited to join us today and had a conflict, but he sent us a short welcome message.
Hello, I'm Michigan State University President Samuel Stanley. I'm sorry I can't join you in person today, but I wanted to tell you how important I believe placemaking is. After all, it's at the heart of so much of what we do on our own campus to attract and retain students, faculty, and staff, and to support their success. Understanding what inspires creativity, what encourages scholarship, and what builds community are key in bringing diverse people together into a welcoming and inclusive community. Our art institutions, public venues, and green spaces are important community assets. And inviting neighborhoods, markets, parks, and downtowns are a key part of the student experience. I'm proud to know there are a number of Spartans involved with the Placemaking Summit as planners, speakers, and attendees. I hope you all find ways to connect with one another to continue to grow our campus and community relationships. By listening and connecting, I believe we work better together to make this region the best it can be.
Now please join me in welcoming to the stage our first placemaking personality, Joan Vorderbruggen.
Good morning. Thanks so much for inviting me to come here. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm really excited to be here to talk to you today about how the organization that I work for and one of the programs that I lead completely fell on its face and made, I guess, what I'll call a placemaking mess in the middle of downtown Minneapolis. And what we did. And some of this is really kind of a placemaking 101 type lesson, but I think it's important just to know that there are some really critical things to think about when you are considering working with community and wanting to improve place that really matter. So hopefully what we've learned can help you too on your journey to make your communities better and stronger. So this is a case study about one of the programs I lead called 5 to 10 on Hennepin. I am the director of Hennepin Theater District Engagement, which is kind of a fancy title for overseeing all of our public art and placemaking programs. We own and operate 3 historic theaters right in the heart of downtown Minneapolis. We are the largest performing arts nonprofit in the state of Minnesota. And Hennepin Avenue and the Hennepin Theater District is a very culturally and historically rich artery that just has a lot going on, a lot of complexity, a lot of amazingness, and it's also very much a microcosm of a lot of the issues and the problems that we face in America and in our urban centers. Just a picture of the past. Hennepin Avenue in the Hennepin Theater District has always been a place for everyone in downtown to really enjoy art and cultural experiences. And our theaters are experiencing a centennial, which is really exciting. And so there's just been a lot of attention, a lot of development in downtown Minneapolis. And Minneapolis and our downtown is densifying and growing very rapidly. Hennepin Theater Trust brings more than 600,000 people to our downtown and to our theaters for ticketed experiences. 30% of those people are from outstate or from the larger 5-state region. So we have a lot of people coming and going, and Hennepin Avenue is really a chameleon of a main street. It is very much a place where there's a lot of commuters, a huge corporate workforce. There's, again, this big entertainment vibe in the evening, and there's 12 stages between 5th and 10th Streets on Hennepin total. So we're just 3 of those, and big stages. In 2016, I worked very hard to capture a Heart of the Community grant from Southwest Airlines, which was this really amazing national opportunity to work with Project for Public Spaces, which is a placemaking firm based in New York City, to do a placemaking program in a streetscape. And we were the only city and the only organization chose in America, or actually in North America, that didn't have a public place. So the Hennepin Theater District spans from 5th Street to 10th Street on Hennepin, and we have no parks and no commons areas. So we have a lot of surface parking lots, we have sidewalks. It's a really crowded place with a lot going on. And so we won the grant, and that was very exciting, and we launched a program called 5 to 10 on Hennepin. I was rather new in my role. I'd been there at Hennepin Theater Trust for about 2 years, and I had been coming from a healthcare background and a community organizing background, and was very eager to please the leadership at Hennepin Theater Trust, which was all very well intended to create some sort of an event that would be in service to our theater patrons. And so we made an event that had an artist market and food trucks and beer for sale and just a lot of offerings for people who would be coming to see one of our Broadway shows. And so what we ended up with was an event that took a lot of labor to produce and was pretty expensive. We built that really cool mobile stage on a semi-trailer. We kind of had all the parts and pieces. We did a Streets as Places workshop from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with lots of our stakeholders and our civic leaders. And we ended up with an event that was somewhat poorly attended and really tone deaf to the area, and actually ended up being quite dangerous and irresponsible, because what we hadn't taken stock of was the fact that 1 block from the Orpheum Theater, which is one of the 10 most prolific theaters in the world, is the largest emergency shelter in the 5-state area. And the Salvation Army Harbor Light is one of several emergency shelters in the area that brings 450,000 people annually to downtown Minneapolis. Hennepin Avenue is also mired with a lot of controversy around some of the more violent crimes that happen. There's a lot of crime, and there was an uptick in crime at the time. Hennepin and the Hennepin Theater Trust was making the news about how unsafe it is, and it continues to do so. So there were pressures from every end of the spectrum to make Hennepin safer, but the question was for who and why. I felt really strongly, having worked in healthcare for a long time, which I think was sort of an unforeseen gift in this situation, that the work that we were leading on Hennepin to create an event that was not inclusive of this very important demographic in the Hennepin Theater District, who actually were the folks that were on Hennepin most of the time, was really irresponsible and was creating more problems than it was creating more positivity. And so I made an ultimatum with my boss, and I told him that if I couldn't lead the program development of 5 to 10 on Hennepin in the way that I felt was important, that I didn't want to be in this position anymore. And I was really, it was really unfortunate that I had to get that intense, but at the same time, he really cared about the area too and wasn't seeing things from this perspective. And so we had some pretty long talks, and we stopped 5 to 10 on Hennepin, and we started visioning sessions in the shelters with human service and social work partners. So we went into Youth Link, which is a transitional housing institution that's 2 blocks from the Orpheum that houses youth from 18 to 25, with Culture Club Collaborative, which is their arts program. And we also went into the Harbor Light Shelter with an organization called Mad Dads, which is a Black-led community outreach program. And we allowed that community to design 5 to 10. And we promoted the fact that we were going to do that. And we launched the renewed 5 to 10 on Hennepin on what at the time was called, nicknamed the Gauntlet at 5th and Hennepin, which was the most dangerous intersection for assaults, aggravated assaults, and violent crime. And we put the young people on our stage and let them sing their life, and it was extraordinarily scary and risky. And it was the absolutely most successful 5 to 10 that we had ever had. We had 300 young people at 5th and Hennepin championing each other, stopping each other's arguments and fights, the small ones that erupted, and had a wonderful time and finally felt very right for the area.
In my role at the Trust, it's my job to really shake out a lot of opportunities for artists and creatives to utilize this area of downtown along Hennepin Avenue as a canvas for creativity. And in doing a lot of the work that I've done in the past 3 years that I've been in my role, we've learned a lot. We've actually done a lot of unlearning to learn even more about the fact that the audience that we're serving out here on Hennepin when we do public programming is a big mix of lots of different demographics.
And one of the demographics that we found to be probably one of the biggest portions of our audience that we were working with for the longest amount of time were really vulnerable folks who are out here on Hennepin Avenue because they sort of have to be. They make choices to be, but they also wait for the services that they receive each evening. They get kicked out of the homeless shelter at around 9 in the morning.
We visioned the partnership to be an opportunity for us to be along Hennepin Avenue interacting with people that we see all the time, people that we connect with all the time, but in a different way. This time we're connecting with games, with referrals, with services and programs and opportunities for folks to get to know each other, bond a little bit, and talk about some of their situations and problems that are involving them to continue to go in a circle. And we began to be a part of that wheel that diverted them into another direction, into jobs, into treatment, into other programs that can help turn their lives around. So it's been actually a great opportunity to see what can happen when you bring some social involvement with some artistical involvement, and they come together with some music, and then you have a powerful thing that is on a street where people just kind of walk by and look at a problem. Where a person says, hey, you got some change? You got some change? Well, now we're giving you some change. We're making some change in your life. We're not just asking for change, but we're building change. And so we're at that bridge that has really never been on Hennepin, that bridge that is now producing quality people out of the least, the last, and the lost. And then those folks that are hardworking folks can see how they can get involved and be a part of the process.
The police department and the cops that were security at our event were really unwelcoming and really created a source of stress, and that a lot of the kids wanted to know these officers more than feel like they were providing some sort of force or security at the events. And so that's why working with, you saw VJ Smith, the president of the Minneapolis Mad Dads, to do our security and our outreach and to allow our beat officers who do a lot of work with our kids on Hennepin to just play and be at our events as people, and not in a position of necessarily, they are in positions of authority, but maybe a little bit more of a community perspective has been really successful. Another thing that we have just been thinking a lot about is about evaluation and how do you prove impact. And I think that everybody struggles with this, and I think that evaluation is definitely an investment or a priority that your budgets will speak to in ways. But it's also, what are you actually measuring? We at Hennepin Theater Trust certainly do not expect to create more housing for folks that are suffering on Hennepin or even necessarily make huge impacts in their quality of life or their opportunities. But we really do care about creating a place to belong, and we really do care about the fact that the area should be a place where people are able to enjoy art and cultural experiences that make them feel good and make them feel part of the community. So we started measuring how happy people are feeling, and a lot of people thought that was really weird to do. But it was quite shocking that if you look at our August measurements, that more than 60% of the people who attended 5 to 10 on Hennepin stated that they felt happy, and they don't normally feel happy when they're on Hennepin. And to me, that is a huge metric and very important to the health and the vibrancy of the area. We also did a participatory mural project across the street from the Salvation Army Harbor Light, and at the time, it was really hard to get our funding partners to fund a $10,000 mural project. I did something that I wouldn't recommend, and this could harm my reputation here forth, but I'm just gonna be honest. I told one funder that the other one paid for it, and I told the other funder that the other one paid for it. Because I felt that it was really important to do. and because the community that we were working with had told us that it was what they wanted. Of course, all of our funders were really excited when we were named a 2018 Americans for the Arts Best Social Practice Public Art. And when we won Best Public Art in downtown Minneapolis, as well as Best Public Realm Improvement overall, winning out over $120 million worth of capital investments for the area. So when walking into those halls of power and those leadership tables after those announcements was a little bit uncomfortable. And when people would say, hey, Joan, your project went out over a lot of very high price tag projects, I just said, well, let's talk about impact. And now 5 to 10's partnerships have grown exponentially. And we've found that 5 to 10 is really serving as a platform for other nonprofits who do community and human services to really meet the community where they're at. And that suddenly we're potentiating everybody's mission together. And that when we provide that opportunity for that platform, people who care very much about these communities can come and do good work with us. And so we've increased our partnerships by over 300%. And I'll just show you a little segment of this video if it works. And it doesn't. That video was a video that we didn't make, that the kids made, that I wish I could show you, but you can Google it. Basically saying all of these talking points that you would think that I wrote for them to say for like a fundraiser. But it's true. They said 5 to 10 on Hennepin is where we can meet each other and get to know each other and have fun with each other and not feel so stressed out and actually enjoy expressing ourselves and tell our stories. And now 5 to 10 on Hennepin is considered a very important arm of a comprehensive public safety strategy for downtown. And our inspector and our safety commissioner says, if you would have asked me 5 years ago if chess and kids singing on a stage and people coming together in this way would somehow impact safety in the Hennepin Theater District, I would have laughed and thought that it was stupid. And now I can't imagine doing my job without it. And so we were just awarded $50,000 from the Office of Violence Prevention from the city of Minneapolis to extend 5 to 10 on Hennepin to not only happen outside in surface parking lots, but to come inside to Hennepin Theater Trust, which is an absolute dream of my professional career, and certainly there'll be so much more learning to come. Thanks.
My name is Nadia. I work at Mural Arts Philadelphia. I'm going to give you a little background on the organization, and then I'll talk specifically about the program that I run, which is called Porch Light. So at Mural Arts, we have a very simple motto. We believe that art ignites change. It's very simple, but the way that we go about it takes a lot of work. So Mural Arts started in the 90s as the anti-graffiti network. The city brought on our executive director, Jane Golden, to fight some of the graffiti going on in the city. What Jane found was that graffiti artists make really great muralists. They know the best walls in the city. They are great artists. They have a great hold of art history. They know their communities. And so instead of going around fighting graffiti, we decided we're gonna put up murals. And so we started going into communities and asking them, do you want a mural? And many of them said, no, we have other needs. We don't need a mural. But what we found when we started asking people, what do you need, is we started hearing their stories. And those stories created amazing murals. And that's the basis of all the work that we do at Mural Arts. We work with communities to talk about what their actual needs are, and then we build murals based off of that. So some of the more recent work that we've done, Ian Pierce really wanted to commemorate Philadelphia as a sanctuary city, especially because of recent policies around immigration. So we created a mural called Families Belong Together, which we didn't think was a political statement, but it became a political statement. Artist Hank Willis Thomas created pick in our municipal services courtyard. That courtyard already is home to a lot of big game pieces, and so he wanted to build off of that idea of the everyday objects and how they represent individuality. And then we were very lucky to have Amy Sherald work with us with our art education department, and then she was able to do a portrait of one of their students in the art education department. This is an amazing mural to come up across in the city. It kind of rises up, it's next to a Target, people walk by it all the time. It's a great one to walk by every day. So at Mural Arts, we really, like I said, working within the communities. So that means we have a lot of meetings, we have a lot of community gatherings. We do workshops throughout the year. We really want to work closely with people. We want to use art to bring out all the information that we want from people about what their needs are, what their struggles are. We also really want to work with community leaders. Those leaders are the ones who give us an in to the community. We recognize that we are not the leaders of the community, that these are the folks who are working every day, and we want them to be our partners. And one of the big advantages of the way that we do our murals, most of our murals are not painted on the wall. They're actually painted on parachute cloth that we glue to the wall. And that makes a great source of paint days for us, because then we're able to create a community gathering to actually have people work on the mural together. And that means that we can have little pieces of parachute cloth. They don't have to be on the wall together, so people can work in little groups. We have some amazing stories of people who have had amazing conversations because of these paint days. Most recently, we're at a provider site called New Life. It's a place that serves people with very long-term mental health issues. So these are people who are not able to really live on their own. They need that assisted help. And my project manager was telling me about a conversation between a father and a daughter who were talking about their respective wife and mother who was in this facility. And the father and daughter were just sitting painting, and started having a conversation about their family member, and said over and over, we really wouldn't have had this conversation if we didn't have this time for us to sit and paint together. And it's a reality of their life. They have to deal with this long-term work with their mom, but they never had that conversation, and so we gave them that avenue. We're also really big on celebrating our murals. We have dedications throughout the year, and really that comes from, this community spent all this time putting all this work into this mural. We want this mural to be yours. We want this to be a celebration of all the things that went into it. So Mural Arts has grown from the Anti-Graffiti Network to what it is today. You can see what goes into our work on an annual basis. Since the 90s, we've created 4,000 murals. At the moment in Philadelphia, there's about 1,000 of our murals left in the city. There's various reasons that some of them are taken down, but we're continuing to do, I think, about 75 every year. And we've gone from the Anti-Graffiti Network into an organization that has these departments. I work in the Porchlight department, and Porchlight is a partnership with the city's Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services. It's great for us to have a partnership in the city. We really work at the intersection of mental health and art. A few years ago, we were very lucky that Yale did a 3-year study of the Porchlight program. They did a study of our provider sites, which I'll talk about in a little bit. With that study, they saw some individual changes in folks, but the real change was in community efficacy. They really looked at how the murals affect the community beyond being a place of beauty. We often work in areas that are very blighted. Philadelphia does not necessarily have the resources to keep up a lot of its city amenities. So these are areas that have not been taken care of for a long time. And so besides just providing a place of beauty, it really worked to have the community come together, work together, and also reduce stigma of the behavioral health issues that we're working around. And people just felt a source of pride in those murals. And as you can see with our Porchlight programs, we touch about 600 people every year. Two of our sites work with refugee and immigrant communities, so we're lucky enough to have about 30 languages that we have surrounding us in our programming. Our first model is the provider site model. So how this initially began is the Department of Behavioral Health gave us suggestions for behavioral health sites that we should work with. What that turned into was us really partnering with a behavioral health site for 2 years. Our artist works with them for the full 2 years. We go in, do workshops. We're very consistent, have weekly workshops. We really get to know the community. In the first year, we worked with them towards an internal goal that they have within their community. If we're working with someone in recovery, we talk to them about what you need for recovery, what are some goals that your participants want. And then after that first year, we do a mural about the internal goals of that community. The second year is about community goals. And so we work with either reducing community stigma about around a behavioral health issue, or we work with other partnerships that they have in the community. As you can see, we work in a lot of areas that the buildings are not in a great condition, and so we really hope that our murals help bring those buildings back and give people a source of pride. This mural was around recovery. We worked with a poet, a local spoken word poet, Ursula Rucker, and her workshops really brought forward the idea of community, how connections when you're going through recovery are incredibly important. And so that's why we have those different connections between the different people going through recovery in their communities. American Tableau was about the voices, the unheard voices of veterans. The veterans that we work with are so proud of this mural. They recently talked to us about having this mural wrapped around the bus that they use every day at the VA, because they really want people to know who exactly is on that bus, and they want our mural to represent that for them. This mural was amazing because we were able to combine mural making with music. So we had a music therapist who actually now works for us, runs one of our sites. She worked with participants to create music around their strengths and their struggles going through recovery. And the mural includes QR codes, so you can go up and scan the QR codes, and that'll take you to the music that the participants have created. And then every year at Porchlight, we also do signature projects. Like the name indicates, they're really big projects that we do that are centered around a specific theme. This anti-suicide prevention mural was created in 2012. You can't really see the detail, but the left side is a blanket, a quilt of people who have died by suicide. And the people holding up that quilt are their friends and family members who came together around this mural and had very intense workshops talking about what it means to have lost someone who's died by suicide and what it means to try to prevent that from happening for anyone else. One of the great things is that one of the original founders of the Porchlight program, her daughter was part of this mural. You can see her in the front in that blue sweater. Her daughter was a teenager at the time and was going through some stuff, had some thoughts of suicidal ideation, and her mom was like, I'm gonna bring her to this, and then she became part of this community. So just a couple weeks ago, I was able to go to the rededication of this mural. 7 years later, so many of the people who were involved in this came back, because this mural really helped create a community. It was a community that they were very clear that they didn't want anyone else to join, but also wanted to work with others around them so that this suicide prevention wasn't just a painting on a wall, it was an actual reality that's going on throughout the city. This mural was inspired by President Obama's My Brother's Keeper community challenge. So we worked with men and boys of color to talk to them about their unique struggles in the city. A lot of information came out about not being able to find jobs, the struggle it is to get the same access to education as other people, but they also really wanted to talk about the stigma around gaining access to mental health and just breaking down those stereotypes and encouraging people in their communities to actually reach out for mental health when it's necessary. We just debuted our latest signature project last weekend. It was a great event. It's called Making Home Movies. We worked with 6 ESL classes, and we paired them with a filmmaker and a poet. And we let people tell their stories in whatever language, whatever way they were comfortable. We really wanted people to talk about what the home was to them, but these are folks who are just learning English, so we didn't want to restrict them to ways that we could understand them. We wanted them to talk in whatever language they felt comfortable. That included images from their past, people talking about their struggles, but also the things that made them survive to get to where they are now. That Making Home Movies project came from one of our hub sites. So we have 3 hub sites. The first one where we did that project is called Southeast by Southeast, Southeast Philly, where we work with refugee and immigrant communities. In that area, it's mostly communities from Bhutan, Nepal, Burma, Cambodia. The hub sites give us a really good opportunity to create a permanent space in the city. We work at the provider sites for 2 years, and that's a great experience, but the hub sites are really more permanent. We have permanent workshops going on. We can respond to community needs. At Southeast, we do a lot of ESL and citizenship type classes. We also try to include artwork in our ESL and citizenship. The hub sites, we really are able to create a safe space for each individual community that comes to us, but we also try to create safe spaces across communities, especially in Southeast Philadelphia. There's families that have lived there forever, and then there's families who are coming in from other countries. So we want to try to create a place where they can meet each other. We also really, especially in Southeast, really rely on our community leaders. They're the ones, we don't necessarily have the language to talk to everyone in the communities. Those community leaders are our liaisons. They talk to people in the languages they understand. Interestingly, Southeast was started because there was a series of suicides by Bhutanese young men, and no one really knew what was going on, why those suicides were happening. And the reality was that we were talking to them in Western languages of mental health that didn't reach them. And so the community leaders were able to reach them in a way, to talk about mental health in a way that made sense to them. We also really try to uplift and create a space for the amazing talent and art that all these communities bring in. We have a great collection of people who are amazing weavers, so we want to showcase and give a space for that kind of art making. And right now we're really working on fleshing out some of our children's programming. We're used to working with people who are just coming into the country, and now a lot of their kids are growing up here. They have their own unique set of challenges, so we're working on creating a space for them and creating a space where they can talk about the needs that come up for them. Every year at the hub sites we do a mural project, and then we also do special projects that come up just out of ideas from the community. This one was based on the 47 bus. We call it 47 Stories. The 47 bus goes north and south throughout this community, and people from different parts of the world all get on this bus every day to go about their daily business. We worked around the idea that the bus is a great place to have that mix of conversations, but people often don't have those conversations on buses. We're all kind of in our own worlds together there. So on this bus, we talked to all the people who are on this commute every day and talked to them about the places that are important to them. And we represented those important places on the bus. We also, our second hub site is called Northeast Passage, also works with refugee and immigrant communities. Most of the constituency, though, in this hub site are from Syria, Iraq, or Afghanistan. The hub sites take a really long time to really come into play. We're trying to build a permanent space in a community. Southeast has been around for 7 years. Northeast has just been a year or so. And so this is where our community partnerships really come in handy. We work with the Oxford Christian Circle Community Development Association. They have a secondhand shop. They've given us a space in the back. And the women in the community, we tend to, and the hub sites tends to attract a lot of women. They've really taken a hold of this idea of creating a hub. And we've given them the framework, we've given them the money, we've given them the ideas that we have, and they've made it their own, and has started creating this amazing community in the Northeast. And I'm really excited to see where that goes. Our final hub site is in Kensington. I don't know how familiar any of you are with Philadelphia, but Kensington, the neighborhood, is one of the biggest open-air drug markets in the country. And Philadelphia itself has the highest opioid overdose rate in, I believe, in the country as well. And so it was just a confluence of events. We were going to open something up in Kensington, and then it happened to be right when the opiate crisis was cresting in Kensington. We worked really hard with our artists, and they kind of created this motto that we all work behind in Kensington called Art as Harm Reduction. That's the theory that we use there. We're very big on creating a safe space, and we want to be a non-judgmental space so that people from all different walks of life can come into our space in Kensington and do artwork and get to know each other, and we don't judge them for any kind of where they come from. Kensington is also an interesting place to create a lot of partnerships. The city declared it a disaster zone about 3 years ago, I believe. And so many people are in Kensington now because there's a huge need there. The homeless situation there is pretty dire. There's not enough beds in the city for anybody. You'll see a lot of needles in the area. So we are working with a lot of partners in that area to make sure that there's safe needle exchanges going on. We work with homeowners there. We work with business owners there. We work with Prevention Point, which is a great needle exchange program. We really want to create Kensington was one of those places where we went in and we knew we were not the solution to a problem because we didn't know the solution to a problem. So this is when we go in and say, okay, what can we do to help the community and come from a place where we really know you, where we really know what you're trying to do. And we want to work with all these other folks who are doing amazing work. And we just want to be another access point for people so that if art is the outlet that they want, we can also create some amazing work coming out of that art. Our artists have been amazing at creating, we're really responding to community needs. So we have artist Swoon. She came in and did a bunch of self-care workshops. Those booklets that came out of those workshops, we still use them in the storefront. We want the art in our storefronts to really be representative of the people who come in. So they help us curate these art collections and the exhibits that go on in the storefronts. And our partnership with the DBH, the Department of Behavioral Health, really comes in handy in Kensington. They provide us peer specialists. They are people who have lived experience. They've either been homeless, substance users, or have mental health diagnoses, or all three. And they work alongside all of our participants in our workshops. And they refer people out to resources if they are looking for recovery, if they're looking for housing. We have this great resource with the city where people let their guards down when they're working on art and they talk to people and then we can get them the resources that they need. And then of course, through every hub site, we have a mural that commemorates all the great community work going on in our workshops. And our newest program, it's called Same Day Work. So every morning in Love Park, we have the amazing Love statue as our backdrop. 8:30 in the morning, we're out there and we hold a lottery. We hate the lottery system, but it's kind of the only solution what we've found so far to make it a kind of an equal opportunity for people. This project is around working with the housing insecure in Philadelphia. We have 10 spots in mural arts every day that we offer people money to do mural making. We pick 10 people every morning. We pay them at noon, $50 in cash every day. We have them come down to our studio in Suburban Station, and we take them through the art of mural making. They do murals throughout the subway stations, and we pay them for that work every day. One of the greatest accomplishments from this, beyond the amazing murals and the amazing work that we're doing, is you can't see his face, but on the left, that's Bello. He was one of our participants. He used to come all the time at the beginning of this program, was picked just by chance every day. And he had amazing artistic talent, so we were able to hire him as an assistant artist. And now he works with us full-time or part-time at Mural Arts. And that's the kind of thing that we want to replicate with all the other people coming through. The real big thing with same-day work is that we also pair with the Department of Behavioral Health. They give us peer specialists. They work alongside folks. And then those peers really help people get the resources that they need. One of the biggest things that we came across is people are not working because in Philadelphia you're required to have an ID to work. Many people don't have IDs. To get an ID, you have to go to City Hall. To get into City Hall, you need an ID to get into City Hall. So it's kind of this endless cycle of people not being able to get IDs and then not being able to work. So one of our biggest, lowest hanging kind of fruit thing is we're going to bring people over so you can get IDs for people. It's $10 to get an ID. We can get donors to waive that fee for you. And so then it's just one less hurdle for people to go through. The other amazing thing about this program is that the mural is in Suburban Station. It's one of the bigger subway stations concourses in the city. It's right underneath City Hall. It's right underneath the Municipal Services Building. And our participants are painting outside in Suburban Station as commuters are walking by. They can have conversations with folks. We can tell them what's going on. But it's also a point of pride. A lot of people live in Suburban Station or work there during the day. They panhandle during the day. And they can see that this is my work of art that I help put out there in the city. I didn't get to go through a lot of our stuff, but if you want to go look through some of the work that Porchlight does, you can scroll through our virtual tour and get a tour of all the murals in the city. You're also welcome to come to Philadelphia. We have mural tours all the time. And we also have what we call our Mural Arts Institute. I saw some of the amazing murals that did in Minneapolis, are doing in Lansing. We really want to have our learning go across to other people, so we want to encourage people to come to us if you are thinking about putting together a mural program, or if you want to put together something like Porchlight. And of course, I'm also available for any questions. Really appreciate the time to get to talk about my work. Love talking about the stuff that we do at Porchlight, so I'm happy to stick around and talk to anyone who's interested.
As a professor at Michigan State University, I'm very interested in working with students. I'm interested in working with community members. So I'm always thinking about place. that's at the center of my work. So the image in the background is a crossover between a piece that I created to think about land, as well as a photograph of where I'm from. So of course, we can't start without recognizing where we are. So one thing that I've learned about being at Michigan State through the work of working with Dylan Miner, Estrella Torres, Christy Dotson, Kyle White, and others who are affiliated with the American Indian and Indigenous Studies program on campus, that Michigan State, the city of East Lansing, and the city of Lansing all reside on the traditional and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including the Three Fire Confederacy of the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples. This is an image of MSU's campus in 1857. And what's really important is if you look in the bottom corner, you see this like little image right below the Red Cedar River that says Indian encampment. So at the time, you still have on opening day of a university, really thinking about there are still indigenous folks who were living in the space. There are still indigenous communities that are working in this space currently. And so it's also important because we're at the 200-year anniversary of the Treaty of Saginaw, which actually was responsible for the ceding of this land. Why that matters is because that's how I think about placemaking. Oftentimes we think about encampment, enslavement, moving, but I really want students and all those who I work with to come into conversation about where they are and the place that we already are in, and think about how they can then contribute to a community as a result. So in the land acknowledgement that has been put forth, you'll see these 4 words over and over again, the idea to recognize, understand, support, and advocate. And so how does our work do all of those, not just for the Black, brown, white, people of color communities, but also for the indigenous communities, for those who are moving in and out, people who are working across class status as well. So for me, I am actually from Johns Island, South Carolina. This is about 3 generations of photographs. It's my great-grandmother, my great-grandmother's oldest daughter, who just passed 2 years ago. She lived to be 108, Mary Williams, and then a photograph of her twin sister down at the bottom and my grandmother. So Ravi Howard writes in Black Nature that the word urban has often been associated with Black in a way that people become so far removed from our history when we don't think about our connections to Oak, rivers, and Low Country. And it resonated with me because I'm from the Low Country. I'm from the area that is traditional lands of Muskegon peoples. I'm also there where people also affiliate with Gullah Geechee descendants. So just thinking about how, when I move to a place like Pure, Michigan, of how we can really start to get people to reconnect to land and place as well. So I do that through a couple different things. So I teach a class at MSU that really came out of my interest in how Black women have always made space, how Black women continue to move through space and map space. So this image is actually done by Tatiana Barclay. She is from Charleston, South Carolina. She does these beautiful pieces with these digital pieces. So she takes photography and then infuses them. So all the images you see are also images on the flyers for my courses. So I use those as ways to intrigue students, because oftentimes we look at these images and it's like, when was the last time I saw an image of a Black or brown person that wasn't laboring on land? So my image the person who really triggered that for me was Avaria Simmons, who's a photographer and was featured in the 30 Americans exhibit that was traveling around the country. And so for me, I use that as a way for my students and I to engage. So in 2017 was the first time that I taught that class. Students had all kinds of different experiences. One in particular was our partnership with the Allen Neighborhood Center, as well as the Hunter Park Garden House, so we'll see images of those. I also like the work of Brandon Stanchell, who was featured in Winter Tangerine, an online magazine. And one of his images always it says, "The man who loves flowers." So it's usually images of Black men kind of tied to nature. And then, as I said, Tatiana Barclay's work, which has really been helping me think through this idea of what are some of the routes and connections and imaginations that we can have around land. And so with that one, it actually is going to be for celebrating 4 years of me teaching this course. So in 2017, through a partnership with University of Michigan and Dr. Taya Miles, we were able to launch a one-day retreat at the University of Michigan. So students left East Lansing, traveled to Ann Arbor, and we had a whole conversation about what are the connections between Black women and environment. During that time, we also, one of my favorite things that I actually don't have a photograph of is we hired a local photographer to come and meet my students down by the Red Cedar River, and we just did a photo shoot. So the original day was sunny. We had to reschedule for whatever reason, and it was cloudy and rainy that day, but the photographer said that's actually the best time to take photographs is when it's cloudy. You get some of the most sharp pictures, and it was actually really perfect. Some of the students used those as senior photos. Some of the students just used it as an opportunity to like really try to model some of the images that we saw and studied in the course. In 2018, as I said, we partnered with the Allen Neighborhood Center and the Hunter Park Garden House. They offered urban gardening workshops. And so on Saturdays, I told my students I'll cancel one day during the week if you would agree to please come with me to the Hunter Park Garden House, and we tested soil, so we learned about soil quality. So this is one of my students. The best part about this class is that it's actually, though it's 300 level, it's open to any student. So this is the hands of a new freshman who enrolled in the course. And my students actually really tickled me because they were more interested in playing in the dirt. And so that people were making like snowmen out of sand. It was a thing. The other partnership was also with the Gender Justice and Environmental Change program at MSU that sponsored a trip to Detroit to study air activism and the way that women are at the helm of clean air initiatives all throughout different neighborhoods in Detroit. So that's kind of the top picture on your top right. The bottom image is also with Women of Color initiatives. So every year for the past 3 years, we've brought artists and writers and other creatives, women of color, to Lansing to have conversations about their writing, about their art. If you've been to Old Town next to Sir Pizza, that's probably the largest thing that the Women of Color Initiatives has done, and that's with Nani Bachacon, Danae Chicana muralist from New Mexico, who came in and really talked to, she didn't come with a design, she talked to various organizers and community members here and came to and decided that that she would actually create a mural that celebrated indigenous as well as Chicana, Mexican, and Puerto Rican workers who harvested, who moved here specifically to harvest as migrant workers. And so in the bottom corner is actually our conversation with Shawnee Peters, who came in and did these really beautiful self-care workshops with our students, with our faculty, and wanted to create PSAs. So throughout the 2 weeks that she was here, students, faculty, anyone could go into the studio and be photographed. She would then turn those into, as you may see the posters around that are telling you about, thinking about breathing and creating and just kind of meditating and being in the moment. So that was her goal, was that we would use those in the height of a time when people are really engaged in social change, really engaged in activism. She actually wanted us to create these PSAs so people were dancing. We had one faculty member who is a phenomenal salsa dancer, so she has photographs of her in motion, and then being able to install those around the city, or even taking some of them with her and installing them in New York as well. In 2019, so in this past spring, the course really tried to take a change. So one of the things that I'm always interested in doing is getting my students out of the classroom and into other spaces to think about what is your connection to place. A large majority of my students are from the Midwest, specifically Michigan, Illinois, Ohio area. And as a result of that, some of them are also from urban spaces. So we're like, well, what is your relationship to that space? What is your relationship to this space? And then what is your history connected to land? And so earlier this year, I wanted them to, some of them aren't really used to doing public presentations. So I was like, we're gonna do public presentations. Congratulations as a team. And so I was inspired by the hashtag Black Girls Who Paint, as well as by Philadelphia Printworks, usually does these t-shirts that commemorate different leaders. I'm also was listening to Earth, Wind, and Fire, and I thought about this notion of like elements, right? The elements, and what are our relationship to the elements? So each group of students worked as a team to explore a different element and that relationship to Black and brown communities. And so they then went on to do these presentations around, they really focused on water and land. I was trying to push them to think about fire. I don't really think anybody wanted to tackle that one. But it was a beautiful opportunity for them to talk about that in a conference that really focused on race. And so it was, I appreciate it. So these are all of my students that participated that day at a conference that was really scheduled or really was going to focus on race relations at James Madison College on campus. And so Ruptures is someplace where I am. As I said, I love Zavaria Simmons' work. Her work really makes me think about what are our connections to land, what can we learn in these spaces where the land opens up. And I am intrigued by the work of Lee Patel. So in 2017, she wrote this blog piece about being disciplinarily disobedient. So I'm in the Department of English and now the new Department of African American and African Studies. And so I believe that my students also come from all different places. Very few of them are majoring in English. Some of them are have picked up the African American Studies minor. And so I said, what happens if I can take my syllabus and have students see that there's so many different disciplines that engage around land and so many different people who are talking about land. So I use my syllabus as a way to say, we're gonna have this conversation that really thinks a lot more about space, but also thinking about, as people of color, how are we engaging with the place that we live in? So with that, I also open up my classroom to so many different scholars, emerging scholars, leaders. So over the past 3 years, my class has been opened up to so many. My favorites, the person I'm the most indebted to is the new Dr. Shakara Tyler, who earned her PhD in agriculture. She also is a member of the Detroit Black Food Network. She's part of their executive board of directors. And she came in and talked to my students about her ideas around harvesting, about seed keeping, as well as her recent work is on Black agrarian pedagogues, so people who teach us about and through land. So she came in and talked to my students. I have a student in philosophy, Jessica Richardson, who is looking at poems that have been written about nature and how they start to talk about our own relationships. Bria Harper is my doctoral student who is interested in Black women and girls and how we can have conversations across age and across different kind of gender expressions. Jasmine Howard, doctoral student in history who is interested in social movements. Talisha Dokes, who will be defending her dissertation, prayerfully, she said, in December. And she's from Fishery and Wildlife. And some of her work is I was excited when I realized, I was like, you are a Black woman in fisheries and wildlife. Come talk to my students and just share your journey, right? Because most people don't know where those folks are located. Brianna Jones, a brilliant doctoral candidate who is looking at the work, who came in and talked about the work of poet Audre Lorde and how Audre Lorde teaches us about our relations through land. And Blair Zaid, Dr. Blair Zaid, who is in African American Studies and Anthropology. And her work really looked at Myrtle Craig Mowbray and how we can find Black women in the archives. So we took my students to the university archives and looked at all the different artifacts of how do we find the people who were here, and how did Myrtle Craig Mowbray, who was the first African American woman to graduate from Michigan State, how did she make place in a place that did not welcome her? She couldn't live on campus, she had to live off campus, the kind of ways that she had to transport and navigate a place like Lansing and East Lansing. And then, of course, my classroom is also thinking about people who are in the field. So most of the folks that I mentioned are individuals who are working as scholars, but I'm really interested in this notion. So Dion Brand writes that to be Black is to always be in search of a metaphor, to live in a fiction, and one is to be in search of the most resonant metaphor. And so I'm focused on all these different scholars who I think their work helps us unpack some of those metaphors. One in particular that I am indebted to, the Black Girl Land Project course, is nothing without Miss Mistiget Smith, who is the founder of the Black/Land Project, whose work I learned about while traveling in Toronto. Eve Tuck introduced me to her work. Eve Tuck is also a scholar who works with Miss Smith. And so I love this project because she went around the country just interviewing people about their relationship to space, especially their relationship to land. So through a phone conversation, I said, are you ever coming to Charleston? She's like, well, I'm currently working on a book. I'm trying to get the interviews that I've done completed. I don't know, maybe the next round. I was like, great, I got you. So my work also interviews women in South Carolina about their relationships to place. So hopefully I'm looking for a partnership. So my students talked to her about how she started that project. Dr. Lauren Powell is the director of the Office of Health Equity in Virginia. And so she helped us think about how health, land, community, and placement are all interconnected. And so really getting my students to think through, well, how might we talk about and what kind of solutions and issues can we address here in Lansing, thinking through some of the frameworks that she offers us. Dr. Olivia Aguilar is professor of environmental education at Denison. We Skyped in with her about her work and how she wants to talk about diversity and inclusion, and not just about getting more Black and brown scholars in the room, but also about opening up the space where we can say that it's completely fine for us to take our students out into the world and be in conversation with individuals outside of our classrooms. Natasha Woods holds a special place in my heart. We graduated from The Ohio State University not too long ago, and she was one of the first Black women to earn a PhD in evolution, ecology, and organismal biology from Ohio State. And we're talking 2000s, right? The year 2000s, that she's the first. And so she really shared her journey of how it was working with students at Spelman College that she realized that she needed more education and needed more of us in the field to really think about how we can get those students to engage in place. Ms. Savvy Horn works at the Land Loss Prevention Project in North Carolina. She's also a lawyer. And so for her, she's interested in how Black farmers and Black families can reclaim land in a space. When we usually think gentrification, we think about urban spaces and urban renewal. And in that sense, it's like, well, where do those folks go? And they usually may end up in rural spaces or suburbs. And so we also ask the question about what does it mean for rural communities to have and make space, to have and make place. And then the most recent partnership is with Dr. Asia Doughton, who is a new assistant professor in forestry. We met at a research reception. And in that reception, I heard her talking about trees, which is really central to my own research and my own interest around this, something that I've learned about the secret language of trees and how trees are talking to each other through this kind of like mycorrhiza fungus root system. And I was like, well, that's something that I think we're doing here. And as a faculty member at MSU, as a resident of Lansing community, Lansing neighborhoods, one of the things that I really am interested in is how can we start to talk about our connections, and one of it is through land. In the course, students have done so many creative things, from creating a Kickstarter to raise awareness about air quality in Detroit, to creating and really thinking about their own connections that their grandparents have instilled in them about land, to also thinking about, like, what am I gonna do with this degree once I go on? Some of my students are working as interns in political offices, and they're like, I'm trying to get my boss and some of the staff members to think about, like, this community that we live in, though I'm not from here, and though I'm now representing those communities. So Dr. Doughton and I are also working with Professor Estrella Torres to do something where we just received a $10,000 Science and Society at State grant, where we will bring in Black and Indigenous scholars to come in and have conversations about land. So we'll be doing that in the spring, and really have conversations about how we can talk to and talk through our relations to land. And so I close with this quote from M. Jackie Alexander. If we're gonna talk about placemaking, I think placemaking comes with a vision, and I think vision always reminds us of why we do the work. So I know when I came here, my vision was to say that I really want to understand how can I talk about the issues I'm interested in South Carolina and rural spaces with students who may or may not have ever been to the South. And really, that meant that I had to understand a place. And so also placemaking is a practice. It's how we do the work. It's how we make change. It's how we actually get in and connect to the roots of a place. Thank you.
We're now going to welcome Joan and Nadia and Tamara back to the stage, and we'll take your questions with our 3 placemaking personalities. Please look for the microphones working around the room to ask your question. Just raise your hand and we'll bring it to you.
This is more of a statement than a question to, I can't remember your name, Miss Minneapolis.
Joan.
I applaud you for stating that it came out of failure. It's easy to talk about success stories. It's easy to talk about accomplishments, but for you to get in front of a bunch of strangers and say we screwed up royally, I personally find that you can learn a lot from that. And so I applaud you for coming up, talking about the failures, and then showing what you learned from that. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
How did you sell the project to local sponsors to get funding for your projects?
This is a question for all 3?
Yeah, for all 3.
I think that's, for me, I feel like that's a really complicated answer. Does anybody do it?
Sorry, could you repeat the first part of the question? Just how do we attract sponsors?
Yes. Like, how did you sell the idea that you wanted to get art out there to local partners?
If we were talking about this a little bit earlier too, I have the great advantage of having an executive director that everyone knows and is really enthusiastic about art, but we still have a hard time selling art as a vehicle for mental health or for any of our other projects that we do. I think the big thing is when we bring people down to our spaces, when they come to see the actual work, we can talk about it as much as we want, but when they get to interact with folks and when they get to see the effects, that makes a huge difference for us. There's been a couple instances just in the past week where we've spoken to people and they walk into our studio and are just blown away, but just what the studio spaces look like, what the storefronts look like. And so I think that speaks a lot more to people than us just telling the stories.
I started out as a community organizer who had to find funding alone in many respects and found partners along the way. And when I went to Hennepin Theater Trust, which is a very successful nonprofit organization, I still was kind of in that mindset, and I didn't realize that there were resources beyond what I could bring to the yard, so I continued to do a lot of my own development and fundraising, and because I was doing work that was very foreign to the organization and very new, it wasn't inside the theaters and it wasn't transactional with ticket sales, I didn't realize that we had the sustainable business model to support the work that we were doing in communities, so I continued to just drive really hard and trying to find corporate sponsors and telling our story. And, you know, I think that I learned from a very passionate place to try to find those different resources, but, you know, then luckily have sort of started to realize the agency that I actually have within my own organization, and I'm kind of aggressive about demanding some of that too. So I think passion is helpful in fundraising and just telling your story to, you know, prospects that might be interested in being a part of what you're doing.
I don't know if I have a. So one of the things I can say is that the course itself was, some of the external activities were funded through my department, well, the program, and also through the college. So I just kind of asked around. Some folks I paid. MSU won't let me pay students, so I find other ways to make sure that people get something for their time. And so for me, I don't think I had to work really hard. I was just like, this is a thing that I don't think we're doing. If we say that we're a land grant and pioneer land grant institution, so it just makes sense that we should be studying our relations to land. So it was a little bit easier for me to use the language of the institution to say, hey, we should be doing this thing as well. And I also didn't mention this in my presentation, but there are some students here who enrolled in the course. So we have, or they just know me and have done work with me. So Dinah George, Asha Dossie, Asia Hudson, and Bree McClendon are here. Can you wave if you're around here somewhere? Hey, everybody made it. So, so if you have any questions about the class, I also encourage you to engage with them as well.
Joan, just to follow up on the first comment by Malik, usually at conferences like these, you see examples of how rundown areas of town were replaced by new economic development project. You flip the dynamic to focus on the human capital of a neighborhood and to empower them. And I'm wondering if perhaps you weren't too hard on yourself for missing that dynamic in what failed. And I'm wondering if you could speak to whether it was your idea to focus on reaching out to the non-residents of the community initially, or was it your chain of command that directed you? And to give examples, especially to the younger folks in the room, how to push back on chain of command when you think they're wrong?
That's a really good question. I was so excited to have an opportunity to work in the arts. I was a professional nurse for 17 years before I started doing community organizing in my neighborhood, putting artists in vacant commercial storefronts where I lived. And the opportunity to work for an arts organization, to do work that I felt passionate about that seemed like an evolution of my journey in life was something that I cared so deeply about and was so excited about the opportunity that I think I was in a space where I really was aiming to please the people who were sort of giving me some of the direction. And you can't, I guess, when I think about it now, I recognize, and I recognized it maybe a little bit later, that my journey in a person who works in human service and definitely is kind of in a place of service to others was not, was still very much a part of who I was, and that being boots on the ground in this space that had a ton of suffering was something that I saw and felt very deeply. And so I was really at odds with doing what I was being told to do and doing what I believed what was right, and also not really having a lot of experience in that space about utilizing the arts as a platform to do something different. So I had the luxury also of, I always maintained my nursing license because I always thought, like, you never know, like they might just say, like, we're good, and I would need to take care of myself and my family. So I had a little bit of security to be able to say some of those things that maybe not everybody has the privilege to be able to say. So when I finally really felt that this was an irresponsible way to lead the work and that someone was going to get hurt, I just, I kind of had to have that sort of come to Jesus conversation with myself to say that this dream of mine to work in the arts and to do this work wasn't worth the damage that was happening to all of these people that mattered much to me. So, I mean, I don't know how you would advise that for others, but I think that, courageous conversations are really important right now in our communities and in our halls of power and in our infrastructure and in our organizations. I think that we need to talk about things that maybe aren't always comfortable to talk about. And luckily for me, the president of the organization that I was working for cared about me too. So I think I was really blessed to have that as part of the equation. So.
Dr. Butler, can your class be audited by non-students?
Say it again.
Can your class be audited by non-students?
I don't know. I'd be open to it. I mean, my thing is I also want to be able to make that class accessible to others. So through the class, I would love to be able to also just take it off campus and offer workshops. So I've done it in smaller versions. So it can be audited. I'm also willing to share my syllabi. One thing that I'm really looking for those of you who are here in Lansing, are partners. So if you have an organization or you have something that you want to share that ties to land writ large, I'm always looking for partners and ways to share this information. So one thing that I can say is that my students also share their knowledge with others. So there was a student who is the former, if not current, president of the Black Student Association, Miracle Chapman. At the time, she was a sophomore. She also was a mentor she started a group called Crowning Young Queens, and they brought a group of students. She managed to find funding and brought a group of students from Detroit. She's also from Detroit, and they came in and my students held workshops. I was like, I'm not teaching, you teach. And so they did 2 workshops. So that was a way of sharing. They did one around natural hair care, because there's a group on campus called Curl Friends. And so they taught them how to make different products out of not natural items. And the other group did music. So thinking about how music, especially hip hop, has really, some of those artists have always been in touch with land. I had a conversation with them about Outkast. And so we talked about that, and then they had the students write lyrics and then create seed bombs that they can then take back home and kind of get into the practice of planting. So it may not be audited by non-students, but I think some of the brilliant students that are here and that were in that class can share, and I'm also open to sharing my knowledge with anyone else.
Let's thank Joan Vorderbruggen, Nadia Malik, and Dr. Tamara Butler for their ideas and inspiration this morning.
Thank you.
Coming up to the stage, let's welcome Rachel Elsinga with the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission.
Good morning. It is an honor to be here with you today, and it's my privilege to introduce our next guest. This morning's keynote works with other change agents at Springboard for the Arts in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Springboard for the Arts is an economic and community development agency run by and for artists. Their work provides opportunities that help artists make a living and a life, and implements programs that help communities connect to the creative power of them. Ms. Junling Wang serves as Springboard's Community Development Program Director. And at Springboard, Junli works as a connector of people, places, and ideas. Her work serves to organize and empower artists, build reciprocal relationships between communities and their artists, and train artists to address community challenges and opportunities. Junli has extensive experience in asset-based community development, community organization, neighborhood leadership, workshop curriculum design and implementation, as well as training. She created and led Irrigate, a nationally recognized creative placemaking program designed to train and support local artists to address community challenges and barriers. In 2014, she was awarded a Bush Foundation President's Innovation Fund grant for the creation of Board Repair, a network organized by and for people of color to create a more effective nonprofit sector by increasing the representation on various boards within the Twin Cities. In 2016, Ms. Wang received 2 Knight Foundation grants for St. Paul Hello, an initiative to welcome and include newcomers more quickly into Minnesota life. In recent years, Junli has served on the St. Paul Planning Commission, the Metropolitan Council of Livable Communities and Advisory, and the Board of Urban Boat Builders, which is a Metro nonprofit serving at-risk youth. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Junli Wang.
I don't usually get to be a keynote speaker, but what I'm sharing with you is what I often share with a lot of people. So I'm also not used to the lights. So I need to know a little bit about who's in the room before I start really talking about the work that we do. So how many of you here are artists? All right, I see a bunch of hands. All right, who here works in the private sector? A couple people. All right, public sector? More. All right, and then who works for a nonprofit? And then keep your hands up. Who works for a nonprofit that has fewer than 5 paid staff? Okay, all right, that helps me get a little sense of who you are. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to take the privilege of doing that because people often ask that later. So my name, Junli Wang. I was born and raised in Berkeley, California. I'm the child of architect parents, so lots of opinions about planning and urban design and buildings. But I also grew up with hippies, because I was from Berkeley, and also artists in the family and the extended family. So also as a child, as a good Chinese American child, daughter, I was also very well trained to anticipate what other people in the room needed. So as I was growing up, this was like a big tension for me, like being sort of always thinking about who's in the room and what they need. But as an organizer, which is how I really identify now, that really gave me great training to understand in a room who might be thinking about what, whose teacup is empty, right? That was my job as a young child, pouring the tea for everybody. I didn't get to talk at the table, but I got to pour tea. So that's just a little bit about myself. I'm a community organizer like Joan is, and I'm a place-based community organizer, which is, there are many kinds of organizing, and a place-based organizer is somebody who we recognize that in every community there are all kinds of people, right? There are people who come from different sides of the political spectrum, they disagree on how to raise their children, but in place-based organizing, what's important is to recognize that every single person and perspective is valuable, and that we're here in it together, right? So the goal is, how do we work together to create a stronger, better community? So it's not necessarily pitting people against one another. And there are reasons to do that as well. That's just not the kind of organizer I am. Which brings me to my work, which luckily aligns very much with sort of my personhood. So Springboard for the Arts is a community and economic development organization. We've been around for 30 years. Our roots are in serving artists to make a living and a life. So that looks like professional development, career counseling, tax advice, healthcare access. And then I joined the organization 8 years ago as an organizer to look at the other side. So we could support artists in our communities, but the question was, how did communities value and pay artists? How did communities see artists in a different role besides people who could do things for free because they were passionate about it? So we have 2 offices, one in St. Paul, Minnesota, and one in Fergus Falls, which is a small town 3 hours north of the cities, and I'll talk a little bit about the work there. And we do work in our communities to be part of that community and to make an impact. And then we take what we learn and we share it. So I show up on a stage to present to you, but we toolkit and we write stories about our work, and they're free for anyone to use. So as I tell these stories, if you're more curious about how the nitty-gritty and how to do it and what does a workshop look like, we have all of those materials in toolkits that are free for you to use. Because our goal is really to spread the work of arts and culture, and particularly of artists. So in all of this work that we do, our secret sauce is artists, right? You can't have arts and culture without artists. You can't have visions of a future, visions of doing things differently without artists. So we define artists as people who call themselves artists, right? Those of you who readily raise your hands. We also define people who sing for church choir, who knit for family, who carve spoons on Sundays, who tell stories, who embroider. All of those people are artists. Chefs, bakers, hairdressers. These are all artists. So now, how many of you out there are artists? Couple more people, I see a couple more hands, right? So it's really important to acknowledge that creativity. And part of the reason it's important to acknowledge that is because artists do things, right? They make things, they make performances, they make murals, but they also can envision new ways of doing things and ask and sing to us, well, why does it have to be that way? It's always been that way. Why can't we dream of something else? Artists will also ask different questions, right? They'll go and they'll sit at a table, and the planners or the city folks will say, oh, this is how we do it. And the artist will say, well, why do we have to always do it that way? So we talk about artists as innovators and creative thinkers. And when people say, oh, we need out-of-the-box thinking, right? We need to figure out, where our city is in all of this, how we stand out. We say, you know what? Bring artists in, because they will think outside of the box, partly because they don't even know there is a box, right? So the way we define artists and the way we see them, that means that every block has an artist, if not 2 or 3. Every acre in a rural place has an artist, right? So how do you tap into them? So I'm gonna share a bunch of stories about what artists do in communities, and a little bit around how you can think about integrating artists into your work more. because I know, of course, many of you do that already. Let's see. All right, so a couple more definitions. So these are just 2 definitions of art that we like to use. A weaving of meaning-making activity with any or all parts of our lives. And then the expression of an emotion or an idea where something is at stake. So this is our definition of creative placemaking. There are many out there. Creative placemaking is the act of people coming together to change overlooked and undervalued public and shared spaces into welcoming places where community gathers, supports one another, and thrives. Places can be animated and enhanced by elements that encourage human interaction, from temporary activities such as performances and chalk poetry to permanent installations such as landscaping and unique art. So it's really about the people. It's not actually so much about the place. I have this skeptical aunt who I always test things on, because if I can explain it to her, then I figure, I got it pretty good. And she's like, Julie, what are you talking about? What is your job? And I like to think about creative placemaking as a house is a house. It's a structure with 4 walls, a bunch of windows, front door, back door, roof, and it's people who turn it into a place. Right? It's the people who live there, who gather there, who share stories, who cook meals, right? We all probably remember where we grew up, right? Maybe we drive by and look at the house that we grew up in or that our grandparents were in, hopefully with mostly fond memories. But that's what placemaking is. It's as much about what is still physically, visibly present as much as our memories and our sense of that place. So it's the people who do this work. So we've been doing this work for 8 years in community, and we did a study because evaluation and measurement occasionally becomes important, and you think you need somebody from the outside to help you with that. So we worked with the Helicon Collaborative, and they went and they looked at all the work we had been doing for 7 or 8 years, and they came up with this sort of nice, concise way for us to describe our theory of change. So people are the agents of change, right? We talk about systems and we talk about inequality and oppression and all these different things, but ultimately it comes down to individuals making change, right? So people are the agents of change. And what makes change? Change comes when you can envision a different future, a different path. So that's about being creative. So creativity drives community change. And so we call that creative people power. And every community has this, right? Every community has people who think differently. Every community has vacant lots, places that some other people think of as eyesores or something negative. We have these places and things, and we can all turn them into assets and opportunities. So creative people power generation, the key principles around that are relationships, reciprocal relationships. Everybody has something to bring, and everybody has something to learn or gain. Asset-based, so is a vacant lot an eyesore, or is a vacant lot a place that things could happen? Right? Equity-driven, so good creative placemaking, good change is about all the people who are there and making sure they're included and making sure they are part of that change. So these are the elements that we think are really important to this. So hubs and homes, places where people can gather, places where people feel at home and feel safe or courageous or brave to do things. We believe in lots of little, so rather than investing in $100,000 big bang kind of project that you've spent 2 years planning down to the last detail, we say, do a lot of a little. Little things with lots of different people who bring different perspectives, different art forms to the table, and see what grabs everybody. Artists at the table, I think you understand that. And then support for a living and a life, because everybody's got to make a living and a life, right? Artists included. And so how do we always remember economics matters, right? Economics is as much about empowerment as all of those other things. So let me get to some of my projects. So this is our first large placemaking project. This was about 7 years ago. This is Irrigate. Rachel mentioned it in my introduction. And so this was the second light rail line built in the state of Minnesota. It was very controversial. It took 30 years to get funded. And it was partly controversial because Well, two reasons. One is the history of transit in our communities was rife with problems. I-94, the interstate, had gone through the core of St. Paul, and it had taken away the commercial core of the African American community in St. Paul. So there was this lived history of conflict and tension with transit. So then this light rail comes along, and it wasn't gonna stop that often in our poorer, more diverse neighborhoods. So there was a huge battle around that. So we weren't part of that. This was after that. So then it got funded, and then there was the reality of 3 years of construction, and nobody was looking forward to that, whether you wanted light rail or not. And so we worked with the city and Local Initiative Support Corporation, and we said, what could happen during that construction period that could just make it less dour, right? So our initial idea was like, how do we bring joy and life? How do we engage the artists in these 6 neighborhoods who are along this construction? How do we engage them to change the narrative, to flip the story so that it's not just negative stories about construction, people not getting to businesses, businesses closing? How do we just say, hey, artists, what could you do? So that was sort of the big public part of our project. I want to make sure I don't forget anything. So we said, all right, let's do this. And I know some of you had questions about funding. We were very, very lucky. This is one of those weird things where we wrote an NEA grant and we did not get funded. But the grant got passed around the way funders share things, and we were picked up by ArtPlace, which is the big national funders collaborative that is supporting the movement of creative placemaking. And so they picked up our project and funded us as one of their projects when they announced their existence. So for that, we are very grateful. And I'll talk about scale in a minute. So over the course of these 3 years, we first held artist workshops. So they're free workshops for artists to come learn about collaboration, creative placemaking. And after they took the workshop, they were eligible to apply for $1,000 to do a project. So we did 28 of these workshops. We trained over 600 artists from these 6 neighborhoods. They very much represented the diversity of the neighborhood, although they skewed on the younger side, actually. So those 6 neighborhoods, probably St. Paul's, probably 25 to 30% people of color. And that's what we got in our workshops. We worked with neighborhood organizations. We worked with cultural organizations. We co-hosted, we co-facilitated. We worked with the community every step of the way. So these 600 some artists, after they took this workshop, then could apply for money. And we were very fortunate that if they applied, they just got the money. So it wasn't a competitive process. This was all about how do you say yes, right? So their projects had 2 requirements. They had to find a partner on this corridor, and they had to just fill out the proposal form. We helped them, we worked with them. There were people who never had email before. There were people who had never written a proposal, right? And so for us, as an arts organization, we said, how can we create some easy stepping stones for artists to start doing this work? Most of these artists had never done anything in the public realm, right? So a lot of studio artists or artists who create work to sell, they had never thought of themselves as people who could step out into community and do something. So I don't know so much about Michigan, but in Minnesota, which is not right where I'm from, people are like, oh no, I can't be a leader. Like, who am I to have an idea and do something? But at this workshop, we said, you know, the mayor is part of this, and he says to you, if you are part of this community, you're invited to participate and share your ideas, and you are charged with that, right? So that invitation and that charge was huge to these artists. So over the course of the 3 years, 220 of those artists applied to do projects. Now we said they could work together, so 2 artists could access $2,000 and 3 artists could access $3,000. So I'm gonna show you a few of the projects that they did and talk about the impact. So this one is Light Rail Shuffle. So Diane is a Zumba instructor, a choreographer, a dancer, and she created a song called Light Rail Shuffle. Comes with like jackhammer moves, and she taught it to her Zumba class, and they did pop-ups. Now this song and this performance are about the history of transit in the Rondo community. Now it sounds kind of boring and weird, right? But when you match it with lyrics and a dance and Diane's energy, it changes, right? It gives her and it gives her community a voice. She talks about the hardships and the history and the sorrow around losing part of their community. And then she talks about how new light rail is also scary, but also that she has hopes for the future. So some of these projects are people doing what they always do, right? Diane does this all the time. She has a group of students that she works with. But it was about a topic that really mattered to her. And so she did these pop-up performances, and then as transit people started to get wind of it, they started to invite her to their events. They hired her, they paid her. The top right picture is a real engineer who is learning the steps with her. So this project, or these are a couple projects. So there's this beautiful Vietnamese restaurant on this construction strip, and their business was just suffering. Nobody was driving there, nobody was taking the bus there at lunchtime, and Tyler in the top hat went to the business owner and said, well, can I just do a performance here one night? And she was totally dead set against it. She's like, what? I serve food. You know, what do you have to do with this? Like, why would you, what does music have to do this? Now, for many of us, we've seen music or shows in unusual places, but for the owner of this restaurant, she's like, that's just too weird. So Tyler and the Asian Economic Development Association kind of put pressure on her. And so she finally was like, okay, fine, Tyler, you can have a Tuesday night, one Tuesday night. So Tyler did what he always does. He has a production company. He has a whole group of people, and they put on a family-friendly cabaret in the restaurant with karaoke at the end. And he has an audience. His audience is fairly suburban, or at least at this time, his audience was fairly suburban. So he had this performance, 120 people showed up into the urban area, right? A place they would probably never go. They went because they knew Tyler. They knew what they were getting into. They bought meals, they bought drinks, they had an amazing time at that restaurant, right? And so this spoke immediately to the bottom line for that restaurant. All of a sudden the owner, Mai, she was like, oh, I kind of get this, right? How do I have more of this? So we had another artist, Mira, she's part of a Brazilian jazz trio. And she said, well, can I come every third Thursday and perform for the next 6 months? And Mai said, well, okay, I kind of get that. Now for the artist, for Mira, it was a place to invite her own audience, to develop an audience for herself that wasn't, her living room or her basement. And so as she did that, other people, people would come to listen to her music, have a nice meal. So then Mai started to think, oh, this really is a thing, and I welcome more of this. And she started to think about, well, how do I bring Vietnamese performers here? How do I pay them? This one is a lot of fun. This is Chris. He's a kinetic sculptor. And in downtown St. Paul, there's a huge farmer's market on the weekend. Like thousands of people come. They park a couple blocks away, and they walk to the farmer's market. They buy their beets, and they go. Right adjacent to the farmer's market is this large coffee shop, coffee, beer, wine place, and it's called the Black Dog Cafe, and they are often overlooked, though these thousands of people are coming and going for the farmer's market. So Chris made this puppet, Prince Java, the mutt, and he actually has 2 people in him, so he moves with 2 people in him. And Prince Java he had like a hashtag and all that kind of stuff. He would go out during farmers markets and during other events downtown, just both to be playful and bring some joy and light, but also to remind people that there was this coffee shop called Black Dog that people could stop at with their beets and get a beer or get a sandwich. He has since retired. He got a little creaky in the legs. So you can just see the joy, right, if you came upon this. This is a wayfinding project that an artist did. Carrie did 8 bicycles, and part of the idea here was that there's a restaurant, a diner in this neighborhood that everybody goes to on the weekends, but they don't really realize right around the corner is a hardware store, a little grocery store, a little park. And so she did these bicycles to highlight to people, oh, if you show up here, you could also do these other things, right? There's your initial destination. What else could you do? And it also spoke to like community health, because you could walk places or bike. But she did each bicycle with different groups. So all of a sudden there were 8 groups of people who had helped decorate a bicycle and talk about what should be pointed out on it. So all of a sudden you had, 40 or 80 other people from the community thinking about space differently, and then also being able to point to this bicycle that they had decorated. She worked with Public Works to decide where they could be posted. After this project, the neighborhood decided that they wanted more of these in other parts of the neighborhood, so they found grant money to pay her to do more of them. So a lot of these projects started very small, just as a grain of an idea, and then they led on to other things, both for the artists and for the community. This artist, Kristen, decided to take up residency at one of the big intersections in St. Paul. And so she, over a summer, she did a bunch of different events, and she shared that information with our Metro Transit. One of the things she learned, for instance, was that there's a big senior high-rise at one of the corners, and she would interview people crossing the street and who are hanging out at the bus stop. And she found out that none of the seniors could make it across the street, even though they pressed the pedestrian walk button. So that kind of information, the engineers would not have known how to find that, but she just hung out there and did these different activities. This is Victoria Theater, a small but socially historic theater in Frogtown. And the filmmaker went and filmed this dance troupe during one of their auditorium performances, and he put it up on the windows, he projected on the windows, and then he also had the dance troupe perform live. So this was at night, this just happened 2 nights, and you can see in the bottom left picture that we're all actually sitting in the construction ditch, which we didn't ask permission to do. But we love this project because, so he engaged people at many different levels, but this was magic. So those of us who were there would see cars drive by, slow down, and then turn the corner, park, and people would get out and join us in the ditch. And it was magic, right? If you saw this, you thought, wow, in my city, anything could happen, right? These crazy things can happen. Kids can dance on a 4-foot wide sidewalk and perform and have an audience. So this is the kind of thing where the story also makes a difference, right? So we've shared this story with so many people, and so many people in St. Paul know about it because the story has been shared. They weren't necessarily there. But all of these projects help people imagine a city that can do different things. They can see themselves and their neighbors. So this is a really big table. The artist created a 32-foot long folding picnic table with benches, and it goes onto a bike rack. And this project was done in downtown St. Paul in an area where usually people think of it as a 9-to-5, like not a community because it's office workers. And the table invites people in. When you see this table out in a public space, you understand it's not like for date night, people didn't make reservations, but that you're just welcome to join. So people would sit there, they'd have coffee and a cookie, they would talk to strangers, which is always hard to get people to do, right? And so since this project happened there, people started to get wind of it, and they're like, how can we borrow that table? And so for us and for these artists, we said, well, how can we take advantage of some of these physical tools that artists have built? Because there are other projects similar to this. And so we actually, as an organization, we started a program called Ready Go. And so on that, we list probably 20 or 30 artist projects that are like this, they're ready to rent, right? You can hire this tool that shows up with the artist, and it can just be for pure fun. You could have a birthday party with a big picnic table, or you could ask people what else could happen here. You could use it as part of city planning processes, right? And so that, again, started as a small project and then had all of these repercussions. And for the artist, is an income earner. This is the last one of this series that I'm going to share. So this was done by a traditional stained glass artist, and he worked with a property owner who had a parking lot with a chain link fence. Now, usually we think of chain link fences as these, ugly things, and they say keep out, right? And he said, well, what could I do with my stained glass? And he made this beautiful, delicate piece hanging there called People Wheel, Paddle Wheel. And there's an apartment building across from this, and the people who lived there told us that immediately they started to see people slow down and walk back, or if they were biking, turn around, come back to this piece, take a picture with it. Cars would do the same. We started hearing about people who were stuck in traffic in that area, and they'd be like, oh, but I saw that stained glass piece. Because this stretch also is one of those long, 6-mile long stretches where sometimes you have no idea where you are. Like you can't figure out, like, where's my favorite restaurant? And so this is another thing that marks a place, right? It gives people a moment to stop in time and say, oh, this is a place. And this one to me is like a love letter to the city. It's saying, I love this place so much that I'm gonna make this beautiful, delicate glass thing, put it in a chain link fence, and I'm gonna trust that I can just leave it there and people will appreciate it. So this is another favorite of ours. So 150 of these projects happened. And then we said, okay, we were sort of tracking, artists wrote final reports, we did some surveying, and we said, what are the primary impacts of these? So these are the 3 that we really see, and as we continue to work with artists and do small projects, these are the impacts. So the first one is enriching or enhancing community narrative and identity, and this is both an inside, from within and without. So for people in a community, what happened was they started to see these activities or be invited to events that were by their own neighbors and community members. And so all of a sudden there was a sense of empowerment and agency that my neighbor, who's an artist, did this thing. Like, maybe I could do something too, right? So people in the community, within the community, are like, oh, this is, we've got cool people around us. If I have an idea, somebody's got my back. Also, outwardly, there was a lot of media attention on all of these individual projects. And that started to show the outside world that these were cool places. These were places where people were doing interesting things. For those of you who do track media impressions, we had a company do a study on media impressions, and through this work, we earned 51 million positive earned media impressions. I always get it a little wrong. That's huge, right? Cities pay millions of dollars for that, right? And those are paid positive impressions. So we got this 51 positive earned impressions, and almost half of them were focused on 2 neighborhoods in St. Paul that traditionally are only in the news when bad things happen, right? People get shot. One time a bear got shot. So usually those neighborhoods aren't seen, aren't portrayed as these vibrant places. And so that was a real learning lesson for us. So that's one of the impacts. The second one is building social capital and diversifying cross-sector networks. This is all about relationship building. When we asked artists to do something they were interested in, we didn't say, you have to solve a problem, you have to do this, or you have to do that. We were really just interested in what relationships they could build. Right? Small relationships with a business owner or nonprofit organization, with people they hadn't worked with before or didn't know. So many of our artists were artists of color, and they brought their own communities through their work to sort of the public realm. So building social capital, diversifying cross-sector networks. And then finally, increasing community and economic vitality. So whether it was a business that got new customers and people to buy things, to a community organization who wasn't maybe reaching everyone they should be reaching, working with artists helped them do that. So I'm gonna share with you a story from our Fergus Falls office. So when we opened our office in Fergus Falls also 8 years ago, there was this huge looming, and it still kind of looms, issue in the town. So it's a town of 13,000 people, and there's a state mental health institution right essentially in town, like 2 blocks off of the main street. It's a Kirkbride mental health institution. Kirkbride was a doctor who was well ahead of his time in mental health treatment, but the history of this place nonetheless is very hard. The reality is it's large enough to house every single person in Fergus Falls, And most everyone there had a parent who worked there, a sibling, a friend who worked there. Many people knew people who'd been committed there. And this campus was decommissioned about 12 years ago. And so everyone in town was basically at odds about this place. It was like, do you blow it up? Do you just raise it? Or is it something that we need to treasure and do something with? So when we opened our office there, this issue was like everybody couldn't talk about anything because they were pitted. Either you were for the Kirkbride or you were against it. So we commissioned a small project by an artist, Naomi, who we later hired. And she created a chalkboard silhouette of the Kirkbride. So everyone there recognizes this silhouette because it's this huge campus. And she just asked the question, what else is possible? Right? Let's not fight right now. What else could happen here? And that just relaxed people. That changed the way they just started to think about all these different ideas. And by doing that, then they could start looking towards the future. Now that hasn't solved the problem of this campus. It's still, all kinds of ups and downs. But just by reframing the question and being a little playful, right? Chalkboard, you can write an idea on it, you can erase it. It got people talking. So we started to do a whole series of artist-led projects around the Kirkbride. Luckily, we did have access to it. And so artists started imagining these things and discovering these things. And what they discovered was that there are people in the neighborhood who had art from the people who had been at the mental health institution. There was a choir director, and he was still around. There are all these people with these very recent lived memories of the place. We helped produce a play that talked about the town and the Kirkbride and the people in there, and it was a traveling play. 500 people from the community showed up for that traveling play around the grounds. And all of the performers were from the community. One of those performers later on said, I've never done anything that had like a civic impact. I never did something where I was up in front. And later on, he ran for city council, right? That experience changed how he thought about his place and his role. So another interesting thing about this is a couple speakers have talked about suicide. And mental health is something that Americans and most of us, we're very bad at talking about because it's hard, right? But suicide is on the rise in urban areas and rural areas with our veterans. And that's something that you don't normally just sit down with somebody and talk about. But so many of these projects talked about mental health and let people share their stories or share, how it impacted them. That in a kind of weird way, Fergus Falls is a place where people have embraced that as part of who they are. And their ability to talk about it is completely different now than it was 5 years ago. This has led to other work by artists. So the community, all of a sudden the newspaper had things to write about. And the mayor was like, oh, artists are a thing and we have them in our community. So more recently, we've been working with artists to do the Year of Play. So there are issues in every community that somehow are controversial, right? And so these artists are doing pop-up projects that show what some of these city changes could look like, or town. So the bottom right one is a temporary splash pad. So Parks and Rec wanted to build a new park and put a splash pad in there, and there are all these people who are like, no, that's a waste of money. I don't understand what that's about. Nobody's gonna come. There are no families here anyway. Everybody's leaving Fergus Falls. And the artist said, well, let's just put one up one Saturday afternoon. So they used PVC pipe and tarps, and they put this thing up, and all these people showed up, all these kids and all these families. And so all of a sudden those naysayers are like, oh, okay, I kind of understand what this could look like. The bottom left project is a parklet. It's 2 parking spots with AstroTurf and a couple of logs, as chairs. And Fergus Falls is right along a stream that's kind of lower down. And there's just a huge parking lot there. So the town was built turning away from that river. And so the city was interested in turning some of that back into parkland, and people were like, oh, I'm gonna lose my parking spot, right? And it's a huge lot, And so it wasn't getting anywhere. I mean, I think there are many of us out in the audience who are like, oh, pavement, parking, bleh. And so the artist said, well, we're gonna rent 2 of these spots for the summer, and we're gonna put in AstroTurf, and we're gonna do this. And it was a passive parklet, it just sat there, but people started stopping by, right? Families, on their walks would stop by. And one time a city planner who was kind of one of the naysayers who didn't really get it, he was hanging out there at lunchtime, and he met this family, and he started talking to them and the kids, and these were people who never showed up to community meetings, who never sent in a form saying what their opinion was, and he learned so much, right? So it was that encounter, that place made that encounter happen. So now even down in the cities, there's this story about Fergus Falls, right? A rural revival fueled by the arts, right? Front page of the Star Tribune in the Twin Cities, saying that artists bring these things to communities. They revive them. And actually we know somebody who saw this article and then they chose to move back to Fergus Falls, right? So they saw that message, and we also keep hearing about more and more young people who are saying, I left home, or I left a smaller community to go to the big city, but now I'm ready for something else, and I kind of yearn for home or something like home. And so hearing these stories brings them back. We also started a residency program in Fergus Falls. We have access to the old nurses' cottage on that Kirkbride campus. So we started just doing an artist residency, inviting artists, can I go backwards? Okay. Inviting artists to come for 2 or 4 weeks to work on their work and also to do a public presentation. And then one year we decided, we should do a homecoming residency, because we know there are artists who are from Fergus Falls and the region who've left, but they still have bonds with this place. And so we did a homecoming residency, and all of these people applied, and they all came home. And they did their work, and they shared their stories. And some of them are thinking about, maybe in retirement, or maybe there's some way I can actually move back home. It also makes people who are there proud to be there already. So I'm like, I talked faster than I expected. That's fun. So in all of this work, the first project I shared with you, and even the Fergus Falls work, they look like big projects. We continue to work. We work with communities that start with $200, right? They're like, we don't have a lot of money. I'm like, you don't need a lot of money. You bring artists together. This also speaks to the funding question that was earlier. You bring people together, artists and people who care about places. You bring them together, you find out what their ideas are, you help them put those together, and maybe you only start with $200, right? Or a couple $200 projects. And it's not because you're trying to get things for free, but it's legitimately, maybe that's where you can start. But what happens is people do these projects, and the artists learn, the collaborators learn, community sees what do we love? And then people out there, the funders, right? People who could be potential resources, see this is an actual thing, right? And I can support that because I understand it now. So often, we can cite statistics and we can tell people these stories, but they actually have to experience it. And so when we think about funding also, we talk a lot about just doing a temporary or a pilot, calling it a pilot, right? Don't say, I need to raise $20,000 before I can do anything. Just say I've got a little extra money in my marketing budget. Let's work with 1 or 3 artists and see what happens. And then all of a sudden you recognize that there's even more value. And then you have proof of concept. And so you can go out and share that. When we're doing our work, these are our core principles. Define artists broadly, work with local artists. Now there are always reasons also to work with non-local artists, but in placemaking that's really rooted in a place, working with your local artists, we believe, is the first place to start. Work from your existing assets. So many communities we go to are like, we don't have this, we don't have a history center, we don't have a this, we don't have a that. What you have is what you need, right? You have places, you have people, you have passions. That's all you need. Collaborating across sectors, that's where interesting things happen. That's where artists can make change. That's where sectors that are feeling kind of stagnant can shake things up. giving people a common cause. So many people actually, it turns out, are looking for a sense of community. One of the things we found out in our Irrigate workshops was that we had the artist who did the stained glass piece. After this 8-hour workshop, he was probably 60, he came up to me and he said, you know, I've lived here my entire life and I never thought I could be part of a community. I never thought there were people like me. And of course, I probably did cry. I wanted to cry because I was like, you're 60 and you still feel like you don't have a community here. But that 8 hours with 20 other strangers gave him that sense. We also make t-shirts. So for Irrigate, we gave everybody, you know, once you made it through the 8 hours of a workshop, we gave them an artist design t-shirt. And people wore that everywhere. When people were looking for collaborators, they walked down the street with their t-shirt on. They showed up at other events with the t-shirt. And we saw artists start to show up at community meetings that they would have never gone to before. And they would, you know, when you go around and say who you are and what neighborhood you live in or what precinct or whatever, and they would say, oh, you know, I'm you know, Jane, and I'm an Irrigate artist. And I was like, nobody knows what that is. But they were like, I have a, you know, I'm legitimate, right? I have been anointed. I'm part of this thing. Providing simple mechanisms, I talk about always trying to say yes. So if you're in a position to give or share resources, if you're a granting organization, how do you make it easy for people to access that? There have been some mentions of communities of color who typically are less trained and adept at accessing some of these systems. So we design all of these systems to be like, how do we make it easy for you? And then give you the confidence because you've gotten a small grant, you can put it on your resume, then you can go and access a state arts board grant, for instance. Small and many, I talked about that already, building lasting relationships, because that's really what it is about. And then, of course, paying artists. So I hope that I've given you some ideas, both in the actual projects, because they are sort of copyable, right? But also just the idea that if you're grappling with a question and you're like, how do we solve this? Don't try to solve it on your own, right? Invite artists. Say like, this is what we're grappling with. What would you do? And then see what people bring to you, what those artists, what ideas those bring to you. So yeah, thank you.
We will now welcome your questions for June Lee. We have microphones that are moving about the room.
I'm gonna, while the microphone moves around, I'm also gonna say one other thing about the funding, which is most of our funding is not arts funding, right? Most of our funding is like community and economic development funding, it's community engagement funding, and then we bring the art part into it. So as you look for funding sources, whether it's, you know, foundations or corporations, it isn't always about, I mean, you have to figure out where the meaning is. I'm not saying being totally tricky, but really because this is about community, so it's broader than just looking for arts funding. All right, are there any questions?
Hi, my name is Alexa Seeger. I work with Fenner Conservancy. I was wondering, when you began this program, how did you go about marketing it to those community groups? How did you start to bring in those 600 diverse artists for those trainings?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. So when we work, we only work in collaboration and also by invitation. And so when we designed Irrigate, St. Paul and Minneapolis have a whole set of neighborhood organizations. And so we worked with the neighborhood organizations, and that's actually where I came out of. So I had a lot of networks there. So we worked with the 6 neighborhood organizations, and we trained the organizers there to co-facilitate with us. And then they used their own networks to do outreach. And their networks weren't necessarily perfect. We also worked with cultural organizations. So there's a Hmong American Center for Hmong Arts and Talent. So we worked with them and we hosted a workshop in their space. So people who knew them trusted them and felt comfortable and went to their own space. So we worked with all these different organizations who were already trusted and known in community. And also, ultimately, our goal was not for us to develop all of our relationships, right? Because part of the point of organizing is for those relationships to be strengthened outside of yourself, right? I mean, my goal as an organizer is to work myself out of a job and never be needed again. So that's how we got all of those people to the table. Yep. Okay, I'll repeat it.
I was really intrigued with the project where an artist paired up with a specific business to help promote that business, like the dog or the coffee shop.
Yep.
And how did that come about? I just find that really intriguing. Right. And I imagine there were some failures in that also, where the artist and the business just weren't in sync.
Right. So the question is how did artists and businesses pair up? So with Irrigate, because we had this long time and because we had funding, we did not tell artists what they had to do. So we didn't say, we want you to work with businesses to help their bottom line. We don't want you, you're not required to do events that draw X number of people. So we were totally open-ended about it. So the artists went about, we had some artists who literally like started at one end of the block and went into every business and said hello. That was one of the first projects. The artists discovered that the used furniture owner, that they went to the same high school and they struck up this lively conversation. So when the artists approached the collaborators, and in this case the business, they didn't necessarily say, I'm gonna do this for you, or I have this way of fixing what I think is your problem. Part of the workshop was training them in active listening, in understanding and listening to what the other person's interests and needs and passions were. So it was very different in every case. Prince Java the Mutt, he could have had a handler hand out coupons, but he didn't, right? Because that wasn't the goal of the project. But we can all easily see how, they could have handed out coupon for free coffee or something like that. We have worked on projects or known other people to work on projects specifically with business associations. Actually, we did, I'm like, what am I talking about? We did a whole round of working with business associations across the United States, encouraging business associations who hadn't worked with artists before to do that work. So it's always framed a little differently. In Cleveland, in a neighborhood in Cleveland, they had a single main street that was grappling with sort of the traditional businesses that were part of the community, an upholstery shop and a key shop, and then these new hip, vinyl record stores coming in, and the business association was trying to grapple with that in the face of also streetscape change. And so they had a very specific call. So their call was for artists and businesses to work together to bring attention to that area. So they came up with projects that did do that. So it kind of depends on how you want to frame it. And then you had a question about failures. So failure is in the eye of the beholder. So we had 150 projects, and people, when we started this, people were like, but what about risk, right? And what about things gone bad? I think we've all seen projects that have happened and everybody gets up in arms and is upset, and maybe there were really tone-deaf projects. But we said, if an artist finds a local collaborator, a business owner, a nonprofit organization who says yes, who wants to do this, that is enough legitimacy and sort of risk management. We're comfortable with that. So all of these projects, people applied, we approved it, we gave them 2/3 of their money, and I think all but maybe 2 didn't happen. And that was mostly because of life reasons, like people moved away or suffered some kind of illness, and so they couldn't finish them. We didn't have any what we would call failures. We didn't have anything that was sort of so controversial that it threatened our program or threatened the idea of artists working in community, partly because they were small, partly because they were already in collaboration. So there's always someone else who said, hey, but I'm the business and I wanted this weird mural on my wall. So we didn't have that issue. Yeah. So no big failure to share.
Okay, this may be a silly question over here. One of your items was collaborate across sectors. I was wondering if you could better define sectors for me, just so I can better understand what you meant.
Sure. Mostly what I mean is working with non-art, people who don't work with artists or non-arts groups. But we work with transit, we work with business, we work with cities, and when I say we, I mean we put artists in that mix. So anyone who's not used to working with artists. I will also say there's probably a role for individual local artists in our arts institutions, right, as they grapple with changing populations and, sort of only a certain kind of person showing up to a museum. But we haven't done that work as much. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jeff Crowley, co-founder of the DeWitt and Michigan Creativity Group, and 26-year educator. I'd like to say talent developer. First of all, I'd like to applaud you and applaud everyone here. But I'm posing a challenge for all of you, and it's going to lead to a question. If you just grant me a little bit of patience, and I know you're up next, so give me the eye, and I will hush. I'm curious to know if you see anyone here, if specifically you see creative placemaking as part of the specific narrative on the national front in regards to playing a major impact to reimagine K-12 education. Because everything that I've heard and seen over the last couple of years in supporting these summits and folks like yourself and your slideshow and whatnot, it feels like there's a missing link. And that seems to me to be high schools or K-12 education and tapping into that talent. Because as you're presenting, these students that I brought here are saying, we want a school like that. That's what we need to do. So we're about posing the challenge. They want to launch educational placemaking. We've been practicing that for the last 11 or 12 years and tapping into that talent pipeline, in essence, grooming and nurturing the seeds that are planted here, but even taking it to a younger generation that will keep that afloat and be walking billboards and advocate for everything that's being said here. But it's a desperate time in education, K-12, and this can play an important role and a key ingredient. So I'm wondering, back to the question, sorry for the rambling, do you see it happening at the state level, the national level? Because it's time. Yeah. The time is now, and we can't wait because these schools are preparing for people for a future that currently is now, and that's tough for folks to grasp in the educational realm because we have to shift the culture first. Yep. And creative placemaking, I see as a ticket for them to ride into that. So hopefully next year we'll have an educational placemaking summit, and all these folks here will be students and teachers. So if you're down with that, thank you.
Sure.
Sorry, Carl.
Yeah, so maybe that's the next sector that we have to tackle, right? I have not seen as much of creative placemaking be part of conversations of K-12 education. That's not what I'm in. I think we have started to see, particularly with Art Place, as they figure out how to really invest in the longevity of creative placemaking, look at colleges. Right, so it's really at that college graduate level where we're starting to see places actually have programs in creative placemaking. At Arizona State University, I'd say they're sort of at the forefront of really thinking about this. They're developing coursework for planners and architects. I don't know if they can make them mandatory yet, but around this idea of creative placemaking. So I have not seen it be part of that conversation. I think we see pockets of it. Individual experiences, because you've got a teacher who is also an artist who's really interested in bringing this into the classroom, but not at a systemic level. There was another question back. Oh.
Hi. Okay, so this is after the slides. The temporary parklet and the little pop-ups, do they ever turn into something that becomes concrete within the streetscape? Can you expand on that?
Sure. So those haven't yet, but that's part of their goal, right? Because the city had a plan for a new park with a splash pad, and there were so many people who were against it, against spending money that way and whatnot. And so those, now that people understand it more and there's more support for it, those will happen. So that was we're like a year into that. But the expectation is that that park will be built with a splash pad, and people won't be so upset about it because they'll understand. The parklet, I think that's still part of a continuing conversation. I anticipate that, yes, eventually, and probably pretty soon, there'll be enough support for them to turn over the pavement into park. One thing one thing that also happens when you get people excited and you get artists talking is that with these visions, while you might not immediately have the resources to make them happen, it makes people ready. So some of us, who sort of, you have these grant ideas that you want funding for, but you haven't found the right grant program to apply for. So in Fergus Falls, all of this activity was happening, and then there was an opportunity to apply for a Super Bowl grant for a park structure. And the artists there were already people who had identified a trailhead where they wished there was something. They'd already identified that students needed to be part of the conversation. So when that opportunity came, there were people who were ready to go. So we won that, like a $50,000 grant from Super Bowl to create this play structure. But everybody was set up for it. But we wouldn't have known that a year prior. Other questions?
So I have two questions. What is is Fergus Falls an older community? I mean, age-wise?
Yes, Fergus Falls is an older community.
Okay. So
do you mean population?
I mean
the age
population.
Of people?
Yeah,
okay.
are they an age?
I was like, it's been there for a long time.
No, from a senior citizen, more heavier.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic smaller town story of having sort of being vibrant at one point and then seeing young people grow up and leave and never come back.
Okay.
Right. So, but that in the last 5 years has started to shift. Okay. In Minnesota, we're lucky because we have beautiful lakes and land. So there's a certain amount of like tourism that will always be part of the economy and that isn't sort of under threat from whatever's trendy at the moment. Mm-hmm. But Fergus Falls, because of this work, they have become known regionally to have young people who do weird things and yeah, that brings a lot of attention.
Okay. And was Fergus Falls where Bullwinkle's from?
Oh, I don't think so.
Okay.
I feel like I would know that if that was true.
It seemed like that was somewhere back in my memory.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm gonna have to Google that.
I'll be loud. So I love that you have, my name's Christine Beamer and I work for the College of Music at Michigan State. And I love that you have paying artists as part of the mission of the work that you do. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the artists who go through your program, like the Irrigate program, etc. Do you see them, how do you see their economic capacity growing? Is it in a more, do they end up doing more community-engaged work, or do they find more project-based artistic work? Because when I talk to my students, one of the real tensions they have is the kind of passions they have to create, regardless of whether there's an audience for that, and also they're wanting to engage in a community and also wanting to, not live in a cardboard box. So how does that work?
Right. So it happens in many ways. There's no obvious one path, right? So honestly, some of the artists who did these projects, they did them and they're like, I never want to do that again. Like collaborating is too hard, right? So there's some artists who tried it, right? And they gave it their all and they just were like, this isn't quite for me. But most of the artists really were empowered by it and thought like, oh, I'd love to do more of this. And so we see artists sort of expanding their income possibilities through things like the Big Table Project, where there's this physical object and artists, you pay them $400 and they show up for 2 hours and do this thing with your community. So we've seen that where, there are some artists who are earning an extra $10,000 or $13,000 a year off of doing these projects again and again in different places. Artists find that, we work with a lot of artists who hadn't done work in community. So we had one artist, for instance, she's a Hmong artist who does these really detailed paintings and figures. And so her work was really sort of retail work. And she did a mural as one of these projects. And then all of a sudden people were like, oh, you do these beautiful murals. And, can we hire you to do more? So she started doing murals, sort of wall installations. She continues to expand her merchandise. But it introduced her to this whole new income stream, right, and attention. The other thing that we've also seen happen in the Twin Cities particularly is that people want to work with artists. So the Victoria Theater story, we're just one small part of the story of the community holding on to that building. But the neighborhood organization, when it came time, the Land Trust purchased it to hold for the neighborhood organization. And the neighborhood organization said, we need a business plan and we need community input. And they didn't hire a traditional planner. They hired 5 artists to engage community. So those 5 artists got paid to do that work. They're a part of the community. The result of that plan is so much more deep and authentic. But a lot of times artists are finding pay and roles where they're not there to make the thing that they make as artists. They're there because they're creative and they're asking different questions and they're connected to different communities. We also started a program called Artist Organizer. It's a program with a little p because we don't actually run it forever and ever, but it's about the idea of an artist being rooted in a non-arts organization to both help the organization tackle its mission, but also to help change how the organization thinks. So now in the Twin Cities, we start seeing, the Department of Transportation got funding and they hired an artist organizer. That is a full-time salaried job. And your job is to be an artist in the Department of Transportation. So it's also creating these new jobs. Yeah.
Let's thank June Lee Wang for sharing her expertise today. Thank you. We have one more presentation for you before lunch. If you would like to take a quick break, you may, but we would like to invite you to participate in an exercise for rekindling our dormant creativity. Please welcome to the stage Carl Good.
Channel changer, yeah. Great. Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. Whoa. Is this the microphone? This isn't the microphone. Oh, I need a microphone. Sorry, I was going to get your microphone. This is awkward. This is my microphone. So that's really far away, but it basically is a workplace where somebody's saying, we're ready to begin the next phase of it, keeping things exactly the way they are. And I love this. I teach a class of 530 students on creative problem solving and creative thinking at Michigan State University. And this is my last semester teaching, and I'm leaving to go search for other things a 64-year-old should be searching for, like cool stuff to do before you die, right? So I'm becoming very aware of, if you can get me a microphone, because I like to walk when I talk, because my feet don't think well stuck to the ground. Got to stay here, sorry. This is starting off really badly. So anyway, I'm going to get going. Thank you so much. Here comes Mike. That is with the mic. Thanks. I meant to not, yeah, okay, well. Hello, yeah, good God. I meant to grab this, but I'm so nervous. I know you're all thinking why he has a big rip in his super cool shirt, but the duct tape keeps falling off that was holding it closed. It won't stick to the fabric anymore. So you can just ignore the imperfections of Carl Good. But I'm going to talk to you, this is going to get really, really personal about you, every one of you. Imagine, I do this with 530 students. I've done this before with professional workshops. I'm going to lead you on a guided meditation, which is really weird, I know, but I'm not a groovy guy, but this makes my students really freak out sometimes, and the parents sometimes when they're there. So I figured I might as well try this. But I want to talk about creativity first. I want to set up this meditation because you need to understand something about y'all. Basically, when we're born, there's no evidence that the baby in the bassinet is any more creative than anybody in this room or anybody else in the world. There's no evidence of that. Basically, babies are born. How many of you were children? I want to know my audience too. How many of you were children once? If somebody doesn't raise their hand, we should talk, because that's news. When you're born with two abilities. A lot of abilities, but two really key ones. One of them is this incredible curiosity, this insatiable appetite for knowledge, because you've been born with a completely huge, empty database that needs filling with. You've got to learn about this alien environment you're in, and you're just going to naturally explore. We had a toddler over last night who spent 20 minutes going through our box of candles. When was the last time any of you went through a box of candles like that? Or the metaphor for something like a box of candles that wasn't really your thing, but she was going, whoa, candles. It's insatiable, it's natural, and it's just what kids do. It's what all of you did, every one of you, because you kind of learned about your environment, this weird world. The other thing we're really good at is we know how to play. Exploring is play, and so is this making connections between this massive database of disparate knowledge that you're gathering every single moment of your life. We make connections, and these are survival things because it helps us manage this crazy world we're in. And kids have this incredibly innovative mindset. They're just always thinking about making something really cool, and they're not worried about being judged or anything. So I'm going to be sort of talking to you about how this happens, that you had this, lost it, the impact it has on your life, and how you can get it back. And then we're going to end with a quick little meditation, which will probably clear out half the room because that's just too awkward. I'm not doing a meditation. Half my students flee the room. So you do things when you're a toddler, when you're a kid, just for the pure joy of doing it. They haven't been introduced like how many likes did I get on Instagram kind of stuff yet. They haven't learned about the like culture we live in. They're doing it because it's just an insatiable curiosity. And so one day this little kid is finally getting socialized by being put into preschool with other children, and loves just this beautiful drawing he did of his dog, or of her dog, and this kid shows up and says, you know what, your dog sucks. Mine's better. And the kid says, you say, oh my God, it really is better. And he joins one of the billions of people on this planet who say, I can't even draw stick figures, and will never pick up another pencil. So another thing kicks in that we're born with, a third thing. You all know this fight or flight thing. Worked great for dinosaurs, sucks in these modern times. Because the only thing we have to be afraid of, really, is being judged. And the sting of criticism and non-acceptance. And our brains are wired to be safe. We want to be safe. So this once explorative curiosity, this once fearless ability that toddlers have to just do whatever they want, to make any kind of assemblage they feel like making out of any two things you put in front of them, it starts to wane. And so these little kids, speaking of K-12, these little kids start to get this mindset that they're not okay. It's who they really are, a lot of who they are, is just not okay. And it starts to get worse. And so you start burying this uniqueness that is you in a place that is really dark and deep inside of you, because it hurts to really sometimes show people the real you. And so we grow up learning, fearing being laughed at, being criticized, being wrong, being judged, worrying about what others think, sounding stupid, taking risks, disapproval, failing. I feel all those things. I feel every one of those things all the time. I'm constantly terrified. I was pacing back there like a crazy person, ask anybody, like trying to catch my breath before I got up here. But I know my thing. I know what I feel about this, so I'm here. But a lot of us grow up like this. Not everybody does that, but a lot of us do. And we learn to manage it. There's a high cost to pay for this. Basically, we learn to fear being ourselves, which we've lost touch with. And so we conform because that's what society demands of us. We conform. That's how societies work. That's how we don't go around killing each other. That's how we all learn the rules. We're all on this railroad tracks. The way we solve problems in this world is we all get on this, we're all on this train, on this railroad track into the future. We're all on it. We're all learning mostly the same stuff in schools. We're all learning what you can and can't do. And very few people want to get off those tracks. So when there's a problem in the tracks, like some huge obstruction in the tracks, what we do is we look down the tracks of our experience and other people's experience and say, what did you do in the past about a problem like this? And we're getting problems that have never had a past. They're new things. We're all in this room today because we all want to find out what everybody else is doing. But sometimes what you need to do is come up with your own weird, crazy, unique idea that no one has thought of. And that's hard. It's really hard to do that. Conforming is death. It's a mental death sentence. I'm sorry to be doom and gloom. I'm going to get positive in a minute. So we learn the rules of starting at a very young age, what we can and can't do, will and won't do, and should and shouldn't do. We learn these really strongly, and it's a way of keeping us in control by conforming in a society that requires this kind of cooperation, this control cooperation. And so we sit at our desks trying to be creative. And I'm defining creative as basically the creation of, the making of something new and useful. Unique, new, and useful. That's all. There are many definitions. But you're trying to solve a problem, and you're looking down the old path of tracks you're on, and who's doing the creative thinking? We're such an amalgam of everyone else's expectations. Everyone's. We're a little piece of everybody who's told us what we are good at and what we're not good at, and how you need to be. And so, I sound angry, but I'm not. But I definitely have gone through this. And I'm going to explain a little bit more. Author Rita Mae Brown said, I think the reward for conformity is that everyone likes you except yourself. Now, conformity and burying your uniqueness does not come up with the great ideas. Now, my premise, if you haven't figured it out, is that I am an artist. You can go on my Facebook group page and go see all my art and stuff, but I'm an artist, and I'm also a corporate guy, but I'm also a teacher. I'm not labeling myself. Really, I'm just sort of somebody who's still pretty curious, who was able to achieve things by basically because the reason, it's sort of like I wanted things that were on the other side of my fears, but my desire to have that or to do that was always greater than my fear of doing it. And if my fear was greater than that want, what I found was I must not want it that bad to want to cross through these fears. Why bother? So the important news is it's not our fault. It's not our fault that, however, I'm sounding doom and gloom. I'm trying to get people to sort of see the water. Where, you know the fable of the three fish, where there's two young fish hanging out, and an old fish swims by and says, hey, kids, how's the water? And they say, what's water? Well, to me, water in that story represents mediocrity. And so we want to fear mediocrity too. And we need to be able to see that our ideas, whether they're really actually pretty good or not, or whether they're actually going to work. And there are whole systems for teaching this, for learning this, and doing it properly. But all of this stuff, it's not our fault that we feel this way, that we've lost this innate curiosity and creativity that we all had, all of us. You've heard that term, you're all born with this. I really believe this. We all had these two things, gathering information and making connections, and that's creativity. And we all had that. So why we've sort of lost it is not our fault. Schools are great, but they do tend to tell you that, hey kid, hey middle school child, terrific drawing of your parents, but how are those math and science scores? Because that's what's going to get you into college. not that stuff. So set that aside and get to work studying your math and science. I'll tell you, I failed math and science, and I couldn't get into any college. I wanted to go to RISD, I wanted to go to LA Arts Center, I wanted to go to Parsons School of Design, and none of them would have me because of my math and science scores. And so I've still never been to college because I decided just to go to work because I knew I wasn't as stupid as everybody thought I was because I failed this subject so miserably. But I knew I wasn't. I had other intelligences, other abilities, but the system kind of didn't allow me to feel those. Parents tell you, why do you have to be, why can't you be like everybody else? Why do you have to be so different? Why can't you be more like your brother or your sister and stop being such a crazy person all the time? Anybody the crazy one in their family that just isn't, your parents just don't get you? Yoo-hoo. Peers, oh my God, just try to join a sorority on campus or a fraternity when you don't fit in. You don't look the part. Or, just imagine all of the things, all of the peers you had then and now, you still feel, like you're not wearing, I'm pointing out my rip in my shirt because you know what? I'm not perfect. I have a rip in my favorite shirt and I'm wearing it because it's also my lucky shirt. And damn it, I'm going to wear it with a tear in it. And the tape fell off and it's not my fault. So there you peers. So these are just some things. There are teachers in schools who just, over here and right here, who do everything they can to try to celebrate the spirit of creativity and uniqueness in children. But it's hard when the system is saying these things are required and valued, and you have to do well in those. Here's some alarming statistics from a study. 98% of kindergarten kids test at the genius level for creative ability. Genius. 98%. That's 98 kids out of 100. Basically, all kids are brilliant at making connections between disparate pieces of information in their brain, being creative. Not just artists, all corporate people too. Everybody, all of you. By the time those kids are just 10, that number has plunged to 32%. By the time you and your kids are 15, only 11% of 15-year-olds test at the genius level for their ability to think differently than all their peers about a problem and not come up with the same idea all their peers had. And you guys, us in this room, only 2% of adults tested at the genius level for creative ability. And that is that's freak out information. It's happening because of our schools, because of our culture, our society. So there's a balance that needs to be found between rebel mentality and conforming so your society doesn't blow itself up. And finding that balance is what's important. And forcing children in schools to all get on the STEM conveyor belt to mediocrity and shame and all these other things that make everyone think you're stupid and you a failure is not the way to do things. So these are things to think about in your own life, in your family's life, in your colleagues' life. How do you pull these things out of your colleagues? How do you get people to think their very best? How do you get to pull out expose that dormant, hidden, buried uniqueness that was you when you were a little kid before it all started to happen? How do you do that? So I'm going to suggest 5 things that anyone can do, and you can write these down. And they're really important. It's a lifelong journey, though, to unlearn a lot of this stuff. I call my class the unlearning class. And so these are things we all do. We're all human. And we're all wonderfully imperfect. So number 1, this is my joke, my worst enemy joke. Well, now I can't go back, but bam. Yeah, so anyway, pow, I'm my worst enemy. I can be my very worst enemy. So number 1, what was number 1? Get your curiosity back on. Do that you should not be doing because weird stuff. I tell my students, I ask them, how many of you are going to London, Rome, or Paris this summer? And millions of hands go up. I mean, this is a big class. How many of you going down to the Amazon? Nobody. How about the Kalahari Desert? Huh? Nobody. And I say, look, while your knees are good, go to the frickin' Amazon. You can frickin' go to London with all the blue-haired men and women when you're 40, when you're 40. When you're 40, which sounds really old to them, right? Get your curiosity back on and go do stuff your colleague, your kids, your peers are not doing. Swim with piranha. Hey, I've done that, and I'm not lying. I've swum with piranha in a lagoon in the Amazon. I'm not talking Machu Picchu Amazon. I'm talking the darkest Amazon where a plane doesn't come back for 2 weeks. Get your curiosity on. Challenge assumptions. We all make these horrible assumptions about ourselves that can and can't do stuff, but a lot of it is subliminal. Look up the term limiting beliefs and see if you have limiting beliefs that you think about yourselves. They're beliefs that limit your full potential. They put a ceiling on your potential because it forgives you from pursuing something because it lets you get out of doing that. 3, push your comfort zone. If you really want to push your comfort zone, during the meditation, go lie down awkwardly in front of this whole room. That's pushing a lot of people's comfort zones. I wouldn't do it, but I just don't want it bad enough. So find ways to push your comfort zone every day, like get past, do something that you would not normally do. Go up and talk to a group of people who are from another country. Do whatever it is that pushes your comfort zone, but do it. It can be incremental, and it gets easier. And recognize that you might fail. Woohoo! You'll learn something about you. Number 3, learn these brainstorming techniques. I teach tons of these things. There are ways to bypass this judgmental and unculturated brain that is critical and is fearful and analytical and condemns ideas and thinks about brainstorming too analytically, too convergently. There are tricks like forced association. Look up forced association. You can try that one. There's brain writing, word association, provocative thinking. These are all ways to trick your predictable brain into being cool. Get into the toy box of weird in the back. Sorry, I said in front of students. And lastly, cut yourself some slack. This sounds too groovy, and again, I'm not very groovy, but, cut yourself some slack. Forgive yourself. Does that sound groovy? So you've got to really think about yourself in an incredibly positive way. Somebody's got to that you're not married to. My wife was like, "You're going to be great." And I'm going, "Am I really? Oh, thank you." I needed that, Like, I need other people I'm a slave to the likes on Facebook. I mean, oh my God, this is so embarrassing, only 2 likes, I have to take this down, and I take it down. But, I am an insecure person, and my name is Carl Good, and I feel like this is some sort of a weird, anyway. But most of all, fear mediocrity. Don't do what everybody else is doing. Delta Airlines does ads, right? Oh, those safety videos. Here's an example. Delta Airlines does these safety videos. No one watches because you all want to be on your phones. Like, oh God, I can still text Aunt Martha before I got to do it. So they know, their communications department's like, hey, no one's watching our safety videos. What do? Hey, we got to make a better video. Yeah, let's get crazy stuff like Lord of the Rings people acting in there, and then we'll have a better video everyone will watch. That's just window dressing an existing problem. You're using a noun and trying to solve the problem. How can we get a better video? You're building the solution right into it. A better question is, how can we get people to pay attention to the safety rules of this aircraft? And my students go nuts with that. Pretty soon they've got apps and games you're playing out in the waiting area, and they're punitive, like, if you don't pass, you don't get on the plane. And I'm like, well, that would work. I'd pass that. Or they're rewarding, like, if you pass, you get a free drink. Or a possible upgrade to first class. I'm going, that sounds a little better than punitive. I'm just saying, So anyway, there's so many things about getting the most creative ideas out of your staff and yourself, and basically leading more you life. And so What I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through a little meditation. And all you got to do is close your eyes and sit there. You don't have to do anything else. It's not going to be awkward or embarrassing, and no one cares about you anyway. They're all thinking about themselves. So here's a word of warning. I'm going to take you into your head pretty well, I think, in a very affirmative meditation. I do this with all 500 of my students, I said, and it doesn't work for everybody. But if there's anything in your past that you don't want to go back and think about at all, you don't want to do that might be a trigger, you should leave. Or just don't do it. Because I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychologist. Can't even say the word. So I feel like American Idol, but let's dim the lights. Are they dimming? It's so hard to tell with this railroad train coming at my face here. Yeah, I think they're dimming, right? They dim, right? They ain't dimming up here. Cue the music. Do you feel like you're in cliche land right now? It's good because this is for you. I feel like I'm going to sing a song. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just get in the most comfortable position you can. Relax, get in the chair. It's only about 10 minutes. And just sort of close your eyes a little bit. Well, hell, close your eyes a lot. And for the moment, I want you to push away any thoughts you have about your day so far, or anything going on in your life. You can think about that stuff later, but know that you can be in this room for 10 minutes just listening to the sound of my voice without thinking about your day. And if your mind starts to wander back to something happening in your life, just gently bring it back, kindly bring it back into the room. Can we lower the volume just a little bit? You can't hear me because it's too loud. All right, everybody, I want you to take a deep breath, very deep breath. It sort of comes out in your stomach. You feel it coming out in your stomach. Exhale slowly through your mouth as you breathe. Relax even more as you do it. Untense your muscles. Feel the weight of your feet on the ground, of your limbs on the table or on your lap. Take another deep breath. Really deep. Exhale through your lips. Have the air come out slowly through your lips. Try to keep your mind on the sound of my voice. All that should exist for you is the sound of my voice. One more deep breath. And then exhale slowly. Can we lower that sound just a little bit? I'd like you to think about when you were a small kid. Maybe holding your mom or dad's hand, walking somewhere, riding a tricycle, playing in a fort or making food with a friend. Do you remember being a kid? There were some good times in there. Laughing, exploring, wondering, imagining. Can you see your face, your smile? Can you feel your tears as a child? When you could just cry? Think about the last time you laughed so hard, so uncontrollably, your side ached. Do you remember ever doing that recently? When was that? Think about the last time your curiosity uncovered something that absolutely astonished you. You had that sense of awe and wonder that seldom happens anymore. When was the last time you were astonished? When was the last time you felt noble about something you did? Maybe helping a friend or someone in need? A selfless act. You felt good and it felt right. Powerful. Your power. When was the last time you felt that inner power you have? Maybe you had to stand strong for something or face a fear. When was that? Can you remember how good it felt to feel so strong internally? Because it's in there all the time. I want you to now imagine you're in a beautiful meadow on a sunny, blue sky day, surrounded by tall, strong trees, gently blowing in the breeze. All 5 of your senses are activated, aware of every little thing around you in the woods. Can you hear the wind through the trees? Can you hear that blowing and see them? They're beautiful. The breeze and the sun on your face feel good and warm as you scrunch your bare toes in the baked leaves and pine needles on the ground. Can you feel yourself scrunching those needles? They feel warm. You hear a stream and you walk over to it. And you step into its shallow, cool, sun-sparkly water and scrunch your toes in the round, smooth pebbles. And you feel great being there. You become aware that you're not alone. When you look up, you see a child sitting on the opposite bank nearby. They smile at you and you smile back. As you walk over to them, you sit down and look at them and wonder if they're lost. Are you lost? They look at you and they don't look lost. As you look back, you feel a love for this child. It's one of the strongest loves you've ever felt. Suddenly you realize it's you at 4 years old. And you get pins and needles through your whole body. And you smile and you hug them and they hug you back, and it's a very happy time. You belong together. They're just kids and they don't know what you've gone through to be where you are today. They don't know anything about the future. I'd like you to think of one thing you could tell them about how it's all going to turn out for them. How's it going to go for them? And I'd like you to tell them that one thing. Just look in the eye and say it. How do you sum up the entire last part of your life since you were 4? This child is still a part of you. They're the original you. Stay in touch and embrace them. Embrace you. No one shares your unique personality. No one. The unique existence of your life's journey, no one shares. The pain and the suffering and the elation and the good times and the bad. Your journey makes your mind unique in all the world and in all history. You have a unique mix of abilities and interests and intelligences. No one is you. No one is you. And you're very lucky about that. Don't lose what makes you unique. Embrace you. Challenge the negative assumptions you make about yourself and be fierce about it. Deep self-awareness leads to self-acceptance, to strength, to love and achievement. Embrace you. Accept that life is a hard journey with many stumbles, and that you'll grow from them. You may feel that others judge you, but you have a weapon to repel them. What others think can't stand up to self-acceptance and unconditional self-love. Embrace you. Be always kind and forgiving to yourself. You're entitled to make mistakes. You're entitled to be uncertain. You're entitled to live your life the way you choose, to define success the way you believe you need to lead a successful life. You're entitled to be wonderfully, beautifully imperfect. Embrace you. Accept this and it'll make you stronger. Don't turn away from what hurts you. Hold your fears out and honor them. Seeing them and accepting them can't hurt you. But ignoring them allows them to grow and hurt even more. They're a part of you. They're a part of all of us. Know that you're not alone. Embrace life. As you sit there, I want you to slowly become aware that you're back in the room and bring yourself back to your body and feel your toes. Feel the light coming through your eyelids. And slowly come back to your life. It's a pretty good life. And it can get a lot better. So take all the time you need to wake up your bodies and come back into the room. And that's all I've got. So lunch is served. Woohoo. Lunch is food. Food is good. Food is free. Okay, you paid for it. Thanks, folks.